Let's start the stream. Let's just get it going. Let's get it going. Tariffs. Stock market is so goofy. So goofy, man. So goofy. A lot to talk about today. But I guess we'll start with AMC when people start coming in. Yeah, I'll take a look today, but just remember, like, sometimes I've got other things I've got planned, so I will always try if I can, as you know. I typically try to hit the ones that you want to hit. SLS was that, man, I don't even remember where I charted that. I think I did it over here. Yeah, it ran up and then dumped. I think it was a pretty big pump and dump yesterday. It went to all the way up to 183, and then yeah, it's pretty close to what I thought might happen here. So I'm not really sure what to make of it. It's not holding up very well on that creek, so you know, it got the bounce out and then it just went really high, but it didn't hold above like that 145 level. Yeah, we'll see. You know, I'm not sure what to make of this. Right now, I'd say it looks kind of nasty because it looks like it pumped up on weaker. This is a 4-hour chart. This is not like a short-term chart right here that we're looking at. It's right in the middle of the screen, and it pumped up on weaker volume, like slightly weaker volume. Not like significant. I like that the volume's mostly in the buy-in here, not in the top. That's a positive. However, there's definitely divergence on the RSI on the 4-hour. So any kind of a sell-off initiated that starts a breakdown, I think we're looking at potentially, at the very least, coming down to this trend. So we're talking about maybe back to like 130s. You know, potentially coming back down pretty low here if it can't hold. So it definitely held the creek hit. I mean, it bounced on it. Obviously, it went from like 124 all the way up to 188. It's just that the indicators at this point don't look super hot to me. They look kind of, well, they are hot. I'm sorry. They look like they're overheated. So in the grand scheme of things, there was a larger creek coming down. I think that got broken, and then it just hasn't really built out the strongest of supports yet. So this could easily become like a UT. You can see this is the top on SLS at 150 or 150 right there. So dropping beneath, like pumping up here and then dropping beneath it is not a good thing unless it's like an SOS with a backup. And it did come and make a new high. So you can see why like I have a little bit of hesitation here. This is just a distributive cat here if it doesn't hold, so it's got to hold up. I mean, that's not really being very specific, but you know, you can see like the move that was made was fine. It just slid really far back. And I still think that it's kind of right on the edge because I think we had 147 marked off. It's at 146. So when I put those levels down, it's usually because I think that's the level that's most likely going to need to hold. So we're kind of like right on it right now, and I think it slid beneath it and then came back up. And so yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't trade this right now to the upside unless it started really, I mean, to be fair, probably wouldn't trade it to the upside unless it broke out of like a local downtrend and then started continuing up, because I still think for the most part it looks pretty overheated. So what I would do is I would use just like a localized trend like that, and then maybe trade it here if it broke back out. You can see what I mean. Like, that's weakness. You see how it pushed up high and then it came and dropped below 147, went to 145, immediately made a new low. So then this comes back up, and then it's a distributive action as soon as it comes back up, because it's like shown that it's not holding that previous support because it took off from 147. So it should have held. So now it looks like more like a hook, like it's coming back up from the bottom. And so when I first drew this out, I thought it might come over the top or get close to the top and then come back down to like 120s. I still think that's probably about right, and you might see it come down to the 120s. And the only situation where I would trade this to the upside is like maybe if it does like a spring-like action, like it jumps the creek here and then advances, and it has to like kind of hold now, makes a higher high. I mean, there's a lot that would have to happen to convince me that this is going to go up. Like push up above the top and then make a higher low and then advance from there. And that's about all I could see. So from this point of view, like, I'm not thinking this is looking very strong. It just looks like a weakness, a distribution, and then a hook. So if I had to guess, and I'm not 1,000% sure, but I would say it's going to take another dive and just continue a slide back, because it's just kind of there. And even if this did happen, it still could have like a secondary top, and this still could be distributive again. I would be watching for a distribution if it like only went up to like 155 or something, like it didn't advance higher, it just kind of slumps over. Then I would be like, oh, it's not looking very good, and then I'd expect it to drop down like lower. So there's a lot of negative like sentiment here on my part, because I think that move was the move and it just didn't really hold. So I gotta wait for it to reset and just find support and then break out. So that was the only thing on my entire list yesterday that was green, was SLS, and it didn't even stay green. It went red by the end of it. It was like up 10% and then it was down like 10%. It was like crazy. So yeah, so we're gonna kind of go through the main ones this morning, and then we'll come back around. So I'm gonna look at AMC real quick. I know a lot of people are concerned because it came down and filled the gap. It didn't even fill the gap, got close. 292 is where the gap is, and this thing didn't come down low enough. It only went down to 308. So, I mean, it is what it is. Oh no, I'm sorry, it didn't go to 308. It went to, that doesn't sound right. Here we go. It went down to, why is it not showing me the number? 296. So weirdly enough, it left like 4 pennies open here, and now we're just pumping back up towards that trend or that support at 320 to about 316. I had marked off 320 on this chart because of the bottom, but I marked off 316 on this chart for other reasons because of the past. So either one is fine. I'm not particularly smitten with this move on AMC. I'd said that last week. I thought that AMC was going to move, like go back to the upside. I genuinely think what we're experiencing right now is kind of a mechanical, methodical sell-off to kind of get us, and I don't mean mechanical like, oh, it's all manipulated. I just mean that like it's basically like shaking out as many people as you possibly can before like a reaction move. Do I still think it's going to come up and hit 4.5s? Yeah, but you know, these things are tricky because when you look at these triangulations, it's like very make or break. Like it tends to be either really, really right or it tends to be like the middle of something, right? So I was trading, for example, just a quick couple examples right here. So I was trading AMD and Fang yesterday. So Fang was one I'd been watching for a while, and I'm like, oh, it should react back up to 166.34, and it did today after this weird like low drop, okay, which I didn't like this morning. But otherwise, it did what I thought it was going to do, which is trade back up to here because that's a breakout, and that's like the hook value, right? So like those can be very, very consistent, and you can see that like consistency there. And then at the same time, you're looking at like the big picture, and it's like this is wildly mathematically solid, but it doesn't, in my mind, mean that it's definitely going to get there because I know that sometimes this ends up being like a pivot, and what a pivot would be is like a bottom. So it's a representative of like an arc that's coming through this, and that's actually not the top that's intended. That's actually a pivot that we're going to kind of rotate around, weirdly enough, almost like a circle. And that's what we found on some of the waves on AMC on the big picture. It was like they don't really represent ultimately like a target. They represented like a pivot point. And it really just depends on the bullish or the bearish nature of the chart. So when I look at something like Fang, I'm like, yeah, it definitely could be that that's where it's going to go on a reaction. But I could certainly see why that might be a pivot on a lower wave here, and that it doesn't actually get up to the top, until much later. So like, it's just an example because I'm trading it right now. I already have it kind of marked off. But this like pivot that I have on February 11th, yeah, I mean, it's possible that's exactly where it's going to go up. And we've seen that before. It's also very possible that this takes till the 26th, And I think I got stuff for like the 28th or something, right? So it's that long, this would definitely not represent the high. It would represent like a pivot, which is important to kind of note in your head because it's like, well, if that's the pivot, then this is really just the bottom of the wave, right, on this S-curve. And I think that's very likely the case. So, I watch these things and I'm like, well, that's the target region for sure. It's a 618 retrace. There's a dozen other things that are there. I found a lot. So it could be that that's where the main reaction happens, or it could again be that that's where the build out is kind of centering on. We're going to see this go more or less sideways for a little bit and then break out later. So when I look at stuff like that, it's in stark contrast to some of these other ones that I've had where I'm like, we just did this trade on AMD like a couple weeks ago. That hit the pivot point. So it was like kind of both too, which is weird. So it went both to the reaction and is now acting as kind of a circular pivot because we had targets in mind down here that it was going to come up to this top at 119. Like I sold at 120. I mean, it was a killer trade. Really, really good. AMC is dead, bro. Yeah, all right, Peter. Come back in like a week or whatever when it's at $4 and we'll talk about it again. Whatever, dude. I hear that so much it's not even funny. If you don't think it's been dead for like a long time, why would you suddenly come to the conclusion that it's dead now? Like I feel you, but why wouldn't you think it was dead like, I don't know, after it dropped the first 90% or something? At this point, we're just waiting for the bigger wave to finish on AMC. I'm kind of making a point about that right now, although I guess people have very little attention spans when it comes to this stream. I don't think it has to fill the gap, no, because I think it could come back down again. But the idea of it coming back down is where people say, well, if it comes back down, it's dead. And I'm like, no, it's not. When it came down to $2.50 the first time, the general consensus was that it was dead. And I think that at that point, calling out $13, $14 probably seemed a bit ridiculous to people. And even now, like most people think that I didn't actually call it out. They think I didn't see that move coming. Okay, That's fine. We went through this last week. I'm not going to go through it every single time we get somebody on here who's like talking about AMC going down. But if AMC were really dead, then it wouldn't have gone only back up to like $13 or $14. That means something in terms of this stock because of the investments that are being put out. So there's very little that I can do to kind of make this stream appeal to everybody in terms of AMC versus other things, and I'm just kind of giving up on worrying about it too much. I genuinely was just talking about AMC when I'm talking about these pivots, and I'm using these as examples, right? And it's like if you flip away from AMC, people think you're not talking about it or whatever. It's like, oh, he's just not paying attention. It must be dead. That's not true. I'm actually talking about AMC right now. So the reason that I'm talking about it and why I was saying like that pivot point matters is because some of the earliest pivots that we had really were this February 14th. And we've had several like that where it's been pretty darn clear like, hey, there's a major intersection at like February 14th. Well, so what? If it doesn't get there, it doesn't get there, you know? And I'm like, yeah, I agree. Like, we don't necessarily know that it's going to do this at all, but I don't think that the idea of like a pivot point in AMC being around February 14th is insignificant. So coming full circle here, like I'm just talking about why this is significant because I think there's a ton of evidence that this is going to be upside very, very soon and going into March. I don't think there's tons of evidence that suggests that it's going to go way beyond. And so we have a very strong lack of bullish presence in this chat over the last 2 weeks when this started coming down back on the 17th. And it's like, that was not unexpected to me. I felt like there was a target low early in this move that could indicate that you're going to come back down. Now, what do we have is just another massive bullish divergence. Like, to sit here and say like it's bad right now is the silliest thing. It's like you want to buy on the lows. You don't want to buy when it's pumping up and about to break down again because it's going the other way. So like when this went to the upside and we were worried about potential S-curves, we were talking about how like, man, this looks positioned to the drop pretty low. Look at where the middle is. It's right at 411. That's where the middle of the ears are. What's the low here? $3. I mean, this isn't exactly hidden, is it? It's pretty straightforward. Did we go a little below that? Yeah, but did we basically come down and hit where that was targeting? Yeah, and where was it targeting? The middle of the gap. It's essentially the center liquidity. And you want to be more specific, it's probably targeting this level from back here on this LSPY, this 298. But why? Why, Booksy? It's dead. Because, y'all, Vanguard bought in right here on the May 9th and 10th. Like, we know they had a position probably right here. Look at that wave right around it. Don't you think they were buying off this particular level at $3 the whole time? Y'all. What part of this? None of this was hidden. Like, we talked about this so much over the last, like, 7 months. Like, so many times that we mentioned it, that this was an important part of this because they could technically have enough ammunition to take it right back down to this level. And they're still green, potentially. I mean, they could have used these positions to just sell down and just start sell-offs. They had 30 million shares. They don't even have to get rid of them all, you know? Now look at the position you're in right now and tell me this looks bearish. I'm like, no. It's the opposite of bearish right now. This looks like a bullish breakout about to happen. Look at this move on the RSI, on the 4-hour chart. It just made a lower low with a higher RSI. That's called bullish divergence, strong bullish divergence. If it breaks this channel as it breaks this creek, it's going to melt up. Now, I'm not saying it's going to go to the moon. I am saying that it's very, very, very likely this is coming back to 430s. So the guy earlier who said AMC's dead, it's like, cool, thanks for letting me know. I think it's about to go to like 430, and I'm invested in that. I have a 450 call. I didn't budge yesterday. I'm not, we're not, I'm not, I'm not playing chicken here. I'm literally just like, there is no game. Like, they're not going to do that to me because I already know that unless this were to come down and make a new low here, which is what I said like 2 weeks ago. I said we would watch for that divergence because it's probably going to, even if it comes down and breaks below 313, it's probably going to be bullish divergent on the bigger time frames, and it is. So why in the world, looking at it right now, would you be like, it's dead? That's like looking at it back here, like when it did this reaction on the bottom and being like, it's dead. It's like, no, that's the time when you want to pay attention and make sure that you're watching really carefully. It doesn't mean it's going to break out for sure, but if it comes back above right now, like that 325, it's out of the major creek, and now it's got this huge amount of space. It's basically just going to slingshot its way back up. There's a 50% retrace in the works here, back up to like 410, pretty easy. Even if this is bearish longer term and it still comes back down again, which I think is totally possible. Bears have to witness and deal with retracements of their own. This is not how the market doesn't work one direction where it's just like always down, always down. Like that's what these pops are, is they're bearish retracements. Now, could we have a pop then, Booksy, that only goes up to like, 390 or 370 and then crashes? Yeah, but I warned about that already. That's already kind of been talked about. This is not like, again, there's nothing new here. I said that 390 might be an issue. That could be a problem. If we get too overcooked too fast, that might happen. But my general consensus is that by the end of February, my opinion is we're going to be up here in the 4s, 4.5s. Hold me to it. We'll see where we are. All right. But I think what we've done now is we've kind of made the length around this major wave. We're probably going to do a 50-50 right up through here and hit like 440 or something. I mean, it's almost perfect. And going into earnings, it give you a good opportunity to either reaccumulate or distribute and get ready for the next move. If you think they're going to do another offering, then you'd rather be up here than down here. You can go ahead and pump up and get out of positions, especially those shorts that have entered here. They're going to get the bigger reaction early on, So this to me isn't that complicated. It seems pretty straightforward. I'm just waiting for that creek jump. And it hasn't happened yet, but again, we repeated this multiple times. Like, if it doesn't happen here, it needs to happen down lower. If it doesn't happen here, it needs to happen down lower. When it happens, it's going to go. And nothing's changed. So I didn't balk. I didn't look at this position and say like, oh, okay, well, I guess I have to get out since it dropped for one day, and went and filled the gap or got close to it. No, that's silly. Why would anyone do that? It doesn't even make sense to me. It's just crazy. It's crazy, man. It's crazy. So anywho, if you're coming in here just to tell me that AMC's dead and I shouldn't chart it anymore, just forget it, man. I don't care. Like, just leave the chart. Like, just leave the play, I'm free to do what I want to do. I'm going to do some charting of AMC. I'm going to do some charting of other things. Nobody likes everything. Somebody's always, like, oh, that's not what I want to see today. Yeah, okay. I still think this is exactly where it's going to be coming into February, around $4. So I'm bullish on AMC right now, short term. Now, longer term, I've talked about this, and I'm not going to be embarrassed by it. I'm not going to be ashamed of it. I'm not going to worry about it. I've talked about it a million times. I'm going to keep talking about it because I think it's very possible that this then comes back down again going into April, May, and it could be a new low, or it could stop what we would call like an LPS just after filling that gap. Again, it's not really a preference in my opinion. I'm going to trade it up to 430, 440 is at the highest, and then I'm going to wait and see. There's other markers that could break out. It could just go, yes, it's possible, but that's where I'm at right now. And frankly, like, the trades that I have been making have been pretty darn solid. You know, I know there's a lot of people that don't want to trade other things. They don't even want to see other things. Like, the only reason they come here is because they want a little bit of news on AMC or GME, and then they walk away. And I'm going to do GME in just a minute. I'm not going to go to something else right now. But, y'all, I traded AMD all the way down here. I just kept averaging down. It didn't drop very much. This was going to be a double bottom with divergence, you know, and it is, essentially. And I knew that was going to happen, and I knew going into earnings, it was going to have a dump and a pump probably, or a pump and a dump. It's going to be volatile as all get out. I'm not going to apologize for covering this because I'm trading it and I'm making money on it. Like, that doesn't make any sense either. But just because I'm looking at something else doesn't mean I think AMC's dead. There's nothing new to talk about. When it breaks this main downtrend, that's where you know it's going to be ready potentially to start going. And there should be some major reaction at first. I think the bigger reaction is probably going to be right here to 360. That's going to be like a halfway point. We might need to come back down again before we try like a bigger move here. There's no guarantees that it's going to continue, but it is what it is, you know? And I'm trading the pumps and the dumps with options contracts because I need to make money. I'm not going to apologize for that either, you know. GME, I mean, what else do you want me to say? Like, literally on the chart for the last few weeks, I had a setup that basically did that, and I had it coming up and then back down again. The only difference is like the timing on it, is I basically said that this was like going to be here. I actually put it like way higher, like way up here. I said probably going to come here and then go down lower. I mean, whoop-de-frickin-do. You know, it took a little longer than expected, but it's exactly what was expected here. And yeah, like, I was excited to see if it could break early, but I didn't count on that. And with all this crazy news about tariffs and junk, and we are doing tariffs, now we're not doing tariffs. We are going to do tariffs, now we're not going to do tariffs. I mean, it's absurd. It's silly. I mean, you look at this and you're like, this market is kind of bonkers. It basically reacted on news really like negatively, and then went the other way immediately as soon as there was like, oh, we're going to pause them. So we're going to have tariffs, market dumps. No, we're going to pause them, market pops. You know. I know, I see, Jason. I'm not going to go to there just yet. So, like, this to me does not look bad at all on GME. It looks great. I feel like this is what I was expecting the whole time. When it did the double flash, I said, you know, you got to worry because it's doing this massive shakeout. There's really no telling which way it's going to go first. So what? This is not in the right spot. It went a little bit low here. Who cares? That was the only thing I could think was like, maybe this is an LPS. That's why I said it could potentially come back up. But I had this on the chart from like forever ago. So I'm not looking at this as like a technical winner loser kind of thing. I'm just looking at it as like, yeah, does it follow the logic of the chart? Yeah, it does. So I'm not particularly concerned, right, by anything that's happened on GME. It's following through on what logically would happen if you reject here. You get the quote unquote kitty cat ear kind of set up, and then you're in trouble. You have to have a reaction now that breaks the creek. This is called a spring, right? You drop low. There's a gap up to like 26.95. Now the issue with that gap, or 26.88, the issue with that gap is on previous support level is that it has to break that gap in order to continue. You can see like really clearly that's going to intersect here. That's going to intersect the the gap fill is going to intersect right where that creek is. And ultimately, there's probably going to be what I call like an ice here, which is like a rising support that's also at play that we dropped. So like there's a lot going on in this little pocket right here that has to be now breached in order to get the breakout. Or am I still bullish about it? Actually, yeah, I still am, because even though this didn't take the earlier path, which would have been a cross up and over right here, that's okay. It knew that the next path would be down, and that after that wave, you have an opportunity to try again. This is what we would call the shallow S-curve right here, if it breaks back up. So it's formed out. You see this little guy right here? Let me show you what I'm talking about. I know it's hard to see. Let me get a little closer. Do you see this little guy right here? So this is a shallow S-curve that's small. So there's a preliminary support coming down. There's a bit of an auto reaction, and then it goes and makes a new low, and that's a sign of weakness. But this is ultimately also just like an M-shaped down, right? Like a wave down. And what this is doing is just crossing up and over this creek here. All right, but it's created this really weak kind of push, so you know that the second up thrust is probably not going to fulfill, and that's why back here I was still kind of bearish. But afterwards, then you could have a reaction that comes back up higher, and that's what happened. You got another reaction that came higher, and it pushes all the way back to the top. Now, it would be something of a maybe redundancy for me to kind of go through and do the same thing again on the bigger picture. And so I'm not going to necessarily do exactly the same thing. But I'll show you, like, when you zoom out, it's essentially the exact same setup. So you have like a falling cat ear right here. When I talk about a shallow S-curve, that comes from this idea that sometimes there's an initial drop that's really, really steep, but then the second drop doesn't actually go that far. And that's what I call a shallow, because it kind of hits and it doesn't really go the full 50-50. In order for this to usually be successful, the next move has to come back over the top, right? Like that really cringe movie, and then truck driving movie, and then come back down and hold support, and then it can break out again. And this, you know, could look like an Eve Atom bottom or something like that, but usually that's like the way that it typically looks, okay? So that shallow S-curve is always at risk of like continuation, which would then be like, oh, we're going to finish, you know, I'm doing a little doodle right here on the screen so you can see it. You're going to finish the S-curve and drop down. So how do you know? Well, part of it's watching the indicators and seeing what's going on. Part of it's looking at the creek and seeing what's going on. And part of it's looking at previous supports and the overall setup. When we first dropped into this, there was a pretty clear indication that this was probably going to come back to the 25s. Now, I didn't have unanimous people, you know, we weren't in this chart, like we weren't sitting here patting each other on the back being like, yeah, it's always everybody was like a little different. And I had some folks saying they didn't think it was going to come down to 25, that thought it was probably going to stay in the 26s, and other people, you know, said other things, yada, 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 like come lower. I thought it was going to come to 25s because this particular pattern setup is a rising cat ear over here. As a rising wave pattern, 1, 2. Usually what happens is that when that 1, 2 breaks, if it breaks, is that you come back to where it began at the very least. Now it's possible that this is going to go farther and come back to near 24 before said and done. It doesn't mean it's going to necessarily be destroyed there and never like recover, but it's very possible that this could come back down to 24 because it never got back to this creek ultimately, like, which is pretty low. Had it dropped faster in the beginning, I think it would have hit right there on the dot on the 21st of January. Okay, but that didn't happen. So instead it went sideways, but now it's in that pocket that I thought it was going to hit when it first came down, which was going to be, maybe 25s when it was sliding down. So it built out a larger S-curve, basically formation. Shallow S-curve here didn't go low enough. It builds out a larger S-curve. So now you're in the same situation, same boat, but you have a very different kind of setup because of the size of it and the scope of it. So what you're saying, Booksy, is we're going to go down? No. You're saying we're going to react and then do it again and go down? No. I'm not saying it's going to repeat the same thing over and over again. I am saying, though, that if this were an indication of what might happen, then the expectation here would be that, yeah, potentially you could break back up and go above this top here, which means you're now breaking out of the main trend. Because if it was 1-to-1 and it was iterative and it broke out and it went to the higher mark, it would go at least to 2880 here. Now 2880 gets you above this creek, so it's a breakout. So it's significant. It's not, however, high enough, as you can tell. It'd have to come back above 2928 to really confirm. So this could be a situation where, yeah, you build out something even bigger and then drop again. Sure. That's like the same fear as us on AMC going to like 390. Okay? But another thing I would note, and I talk about this a little bit here and there, is like the breakdowns typically are related to that LSPY level. So in the beginning, when this first formed, this it's very biblical, Booksy. When this first formed, you have a breakdown here that's like a 50-50. So that gap level all the way down to where that first little LSPY is right here. Well, I wouldn't call it an LSPY. I would call it a preliminary support area. That usually ends up being like a 50-50 for the whole region. So right now it's following that logic and it is working. So that typically, what I'm saying is like this drop in typically builds out and this ends up being the middle. And so we were widening on that middle. And I was saying that before, like last week or something, that you can see like that widening around that center mark, which again is like 2762. That is where it is. So going back to the top, does that give me a sense of comfort? Sure. It makes it seem like very likely that this could come all the way back up to 2985 even. That's high enough. That's exactly where I want to see it, because that's where I want to see that breakout here. And yeah, my charts are timing-wise usually kind of off, but like this is, the levels are there for a reason. This is still like very important as a potential level. So is this a good move, an adequate move? Yeah. So is it possible that this is not actually like DOA or whatever? Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like in a position where I think it's kind of following, again, the typical logic of this setup, and that's the reaction that you look for right there on that move. Now, in terms of these cross trends, I didn't really mess with these very much, to be honest. I kind of just had doodled like an arrow. We can fix this to make it better. We probably should, because right now it's like way off. I'm still going to go to where it broke here through the middle. So I think this is roughly that trajectory up, the wave trajectory. So this would suggest that Wednesday or Thursday even, you could be all the way up at 29.95. And that's pretty close. So did I, again, exit positions yesterday on the drop? No. You know, I'm just waiting. So I'm not of the opinion that this is suddenly bearish because we had a red day. You know, I think that'd be pretty silly. The only other two positions that I'm really watching very steadily right now, AMD, which again, I bought in several times, but I think the last buy-in was like really right at the bottom at like 113. Probably up pretty well right now on that one. I'm not going to cover it too much. I think that it's broken out here, so at this point, I would expect there to be some kind of a try for support. There's a gap below, which is not always the best. It didn't fill it, not really. But I think it's going to try for support. Earnings are tonight, so it's a big deal. Wouldn't be surprised to see some kind of craziness about earnings. Love you. I'll watch this breakout and then see if it holds this support. Really looking at it holding above 117.20. I think if it holds 117.20, it's going to go up probably again tomorrow, our earnings, and come up, finally hit that 1 hour EMA, which is up here around 121. That's really where I want to see the action, because at the end of the day, like, that's where the bigger breakout is, and this move is just getting started if it goes. Because after that, the bigger triangulations are way up here. I mean, we've got one major one. Again, could this be like a pivot on a wave? Yeah. So is it necessarily a target? No. It could be that it's not a target, right? But we've got a pretty major one even this week at like 130. What if that's just the wave and it's just building a bottom and that's like the middle? Who cares, you know? It's still, the targets here are still there. The gaps at 127 and 128, I think, are really likely. So I had bought 150 calls because I think it's going to get up there. And there's a gap way up here, like 137. Most analysts think AMD should be between 130 and 150. There's some people that are really deviant on that. Like they say, I found one guy that said like 110, so he's really like really downgrading it. I couldn't find anybody like in the middle between those values. It was really like most of it was concentrated 130s to 150s, and I agree with that. I think it left behind a pretty massive trend. It tested it quite a bit on the way down, but if this is a wave, it's going to come back up to 150s. I don't think it's necessarily going to be right now in February, but it's possible. Long term, I think it's very likely going to happen by March of this year. I mean, that's the wave right there. So I'm looking at this like, in my opinion, I got a March 21st 150 call. I don't know if I'm going to hold it that whole time, but I mean, there's another major downtrend. I don't know what this value is right here. It looks like really wonky, but I think it's like right there. Yeah, it just looks a little off for some reason. There's another major downtrend that it hasn't checked in a long time, and that would probably be right here on 150 and March 7th, which is the one that I was kind of looking at, that triangulation as like the main trajectories right now. To me, suggests like right there. So I'm like fairly confident that this is going to be really, really bullish going forward. I don't know how long it's going to take, you know, to break out and go. That kind of thing is totally like questionable. I think there's going to be a lot of chop down here. But in the meantime, like, this is a good trade. This is easy trade, you know. And I said the same about Fang. I watched this for like the last month and a half or whatever, or month and a few days, whatever it's been. Maybe it's only been a month. But I was like, it's going to come up here and then come back down. And when it came up here, I waited and it came back down. And now it's like the levels that I wanted it. It's literally right where I drew the marker here. And I didn't know if it was going to hit that. I thought it was close enough yesterday, but whatever. It still dropped and hit it. And I'm still waiting for the bigger breakout. I don't think it's broken out yet. And I'm wondering if it's going to chop here. There's an earnings coming up as well on this one this month. So earnings season. But I think this is definitely bound for 170s and then beyond. And when it breaks out here, it's probably going to be a pretty huge move all the way back up to 218. I mean, that's like kind of the minimum too. I don't even know if it deserves to go that far, but easy to trade, right? So I'm looking at something like AMC and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to just trade it like I trade everything else. Like I could get overly excited and say I think it's going to go to the moon, or I can kind of just mitigate expectations and just say, you know, it could, but what would be better is just to sort of trade it like I always do on these other charts, because that's been making money. Like that's been getting me actual income. Like I met my goals and then some. I was able to trade full-time trade last month, like as an income. So for me, it's like, I don't really know if I should apologize for not covering AMC as much. I don't feel like I should, because it's been beneficial for me to not focus on it as much and trade it when it becomes a good trade. And I think it's become a good trade again right now. And it's coming back above that top, that 316. We got to see that 320 It's kind of where the rubber meets the road here anyways. It looks like it's going to intersect right there on that creek. So it'll need to break 320. So it's a little bit like GME. Like both of them have intersections coming up that are very pivotal. So for AMC, it's right here, and that's about 320, probably about till about 330. For GME, it's right here. It's about 2693. So I think all of that's going to be very important and vital over the next couple of days to watch. Excuse me. But my last thought last week was that everything looked like it's pretty much ready to go. I had no idea that the tariff thing was going to happen and that the market was going to dump. That's true. Thanks, Tyler. I know. You guys are like, why do we have to prop you up off your insecurities, man? Just be secure. It's weird because you have to be confident in the market. You have to be willing to take some risks to make money. Scared money doesn't make money. But, at the same time, there is a community here. Like I had built up a long-term, I don't want to say reputation. Maybe my reputation isn't very good at all. I've heard a lot of people say it's not. So that might not be the right word to use. But I've had a lot of consistency in terms of like AMC coverage. And of the many, many people who've covered AMC, I probably am one of the last of the original group that still kind of covers it. I don't wear that as like a badge. It's just a matter of like fact. Like I just covered it longer. I've stayed with it. I'm still thinking that it's bullish long term. I've been talking about coming back up to $60 or whatever it may be around that area by February 2026. That hasn't changed, but that's a long time from now. That's a year from now, So it's not very attractive, I guess, to say that because people are like, all right, I guess I'll just clock out, come back later. Well, in the meantime, I'd like to earn money. So that's what I'm doing. And I'm doing a lot of things, right? I do animation work and illustration work and other stuff like that. But I'm trying to do other things. I was trying to start up a new nonprofit, which it's fine. It's not like going very far, but that's okay. I'm taking some of the money that I'm earning from stock trading, but I'm trying to work out like percentages right now. It's basically just a sponsorship at this moment. There's not really anybody else invested in it, but the money that I've made selling some artwork here and there is gone towards it. And so there's like a lot of stuff like I want to do, like I'm trying to do. This is part of it. The YouTube bit is probably, if I had to pick one thing, I don't think it's expendable. I wouldn't say that. But I would say it's like maybe one of the lesser importance because technically speaking, like if I can make money doing other things, then I'm okay. As long as I'm happy with what I'm doing and I'm able to kind of accomplish some of these other goals that I have. And you don't need to have a community of stock traders necessarily to make money in the market. You can totally do it completely by yourself if you want. It's nice to have, but just make sure, like we talk about our trading group or whatever you want to call it. It's a great Discord, but it took a long time to get there. I'm really disappointed that the first Discord turned into what it turned into, but the writing was on the wall for a long time. Like Stockfather left pretty early because I think he knew, and I just kind of stayed with it. But the new Discord group that we have is like really solid. Like I'm really happy with it, and I think it's great. So that's the kind of environment that I think I wanted, and I don't know if it's perfect. It doesn't have to be. There's obviously some messiness to it at times, but like the nature of like a community group for trading, it almost doesn't make sense because trading is a very individualized activity. But it's great to have to bounce ideas off people and to see things that you normally wouldn't see. So one of the benefits of it, I guess, is that having a channel like this is like Jason. He's asking me about all these stocks. They're not all ones that I take trades in, but they're there. Like you could have traded it, right? One that I'm watching right now is this OCGN, Ocugen. I don't really know much about it. I just looked at the chart today and I was like, it's kind of a mixed bag. I could definitely see how this could come back down to near 61 cents. But long term, it's got a lot of consolidation in this like lower area. It's already come down like frequently. It's starting to kind of push the boundaries of like a major trend. I think that, I'll read that comment, Gus, in just a second. I think that's an interesting comment. So I'm going to read that. But I think this is just kind of where I'm at with it. Like it's sort of at this point where it could technically break lower. It's not the best trade in the world necessarily at this point because it hasn't confirmed the breakouts, but it's pretty close. I've got a fairly loose stop on it of like 17 cents because I think if it did drop 17%, I think if it did drop, it could come down to like 60 cents. And it does have like that, descending triangle look to it, a potential cat ear. But these can also build out as bottoms. They don't have to be bearish all the time. So if it does break, it looks like it's doing what I didn't want it to do, which is like popping above and then not holding. So we need to see it re-advance back over the creek here. Anyways, so this is one that like I wouldn't have found if someone hadn't mentioned it. And I think it's potentially got some really strong legs to it. Most of the analysts, I guess, are thinking it's going to go back to $5 or $6, maybe even up to $7. I don't really care as much about that as I do about the bigger picture, which is that, if it breaks here, it's probably going to move pretty quick up to 82 and then $1 again. And if it breaks near $1, then it's going to move pretty fast, maybe up to $1.50. And if it makes that move, then it's definitely going to go really far. So it's like there's a lot of little layers here that make me kind of curious about it as a stock. And I'm like, sure, I get it. It's kind of got all the right markers for a walkout if it happens, in a good way, like walking back out of these lows, because the major waves are pretty long term and they're large, and you've also got it's just there. I don't know how to describe that. The waves are just there. And like the bigger picture waves are kind of setting up right. So is this a definite buy? No. But, these are the kind of things that like in a community atmosphere, I think, I'll throw, 100 shares in. Why not? It could go up 800%, over the next couple of years. It's not like something that I'm going to maybe watch religiously. And even if it does go down, that's a pretty low risk. So the risk reward here is pretty good, I guess is all I'm trying to say. So right now I'm like, this is a fairly decent setup, and I like it. And somebody else came up with that, and I like that. So all right. So Gus Phillips says that Amazon wants to get into cannabis when legalization comes. Order your weed through Amazon. Is that what they're saying? I'm not laughing because I think it's ridiculous. I'm not laughing because I think it's not possible. I just think the idea of it's just really funny to me. It's already it's really weird. So like one thing that I'll just tell you really quick. It's just a little short, very short thing. During Christmas, it was really for his birthday and Christmas or whatever. My son got ant farms, like literal ant farms, not like some kind of a game or I don't know, a book about mistreatment of ants or something. But it was a so like ant farms, but you have to order the ants, and they have vouchers so you can order directly through the company that made the ant farm. And I'm already kind of like weirded out by that idea because I'm like, so you're gonna ship these ants through the mail, is what you're saying? Yes, that's essentially. They put them in like a tube, and I guess ants can survive all kinds of stuff. That doesn't surprise me. But just the concept of like buying and selling little creatures and like sending them through the mail just kind of like feels weird to me. But I'm like, I don't know how else you're supposed to get ants. So go get them yourself. I'm not going to go pick up the bunch of fire ants in my yard, if that's what you're wondering. So that's all the ants we have here, little fire ant nests. I'm not going to go get some fire ants and throw them in the ant farm. But I thought that was kind of strange. So I'm just thinking about, it just made me giggle thinking about weed, cannabis. Yeah. He just won his vote, and Trump said he would be open to cannabis revenues if it was done the right way. Heavy regs. He ain't no drug fan. Also, RFK isn't through the vote process yet. For those interested in ants, there's a great YouTube channel called Ants Canada, and the content creator does a lot of videos on different ants and ant-related things. That's super cool and nerdy. I like it. I might actually look that up. Ants Canada. I'm going to write that down. Because, like, I don't really know what made my son want an ant farm. I guess it's always been in the works because I told you guys the story about him attacking ants at school and then he ended up getting like ant bites all over him, and then he did it again, and then he did it again, and I called the school and I told the principal he needed to get the ant people out there. He was technically like getting himself into trouble though, because he was like going where they weren't supposed to go. They weren't supposed to go beyond this like tree line, and these kids were like hiding behind a tree kicking ants. And part of me like giggles at that. I'm like, yeah, that sounds like life as a child. It's wonderful, you know. That's something I'll hopefully keep with me forever, and I'll tell him when he's older. You know, you kicked ant hills when you were a kid and got bites. But weirdly, he got like, I don't know if he got soft to ants or what it was about it. He goes, soft to ants? What are you? Toxic masculinity, killing ants. Look, there's nothing I can do if my kid is at recess at school and then stomps on an ant pile. I tell him not to, but he just did it anyways. That was a long time ago. He hasn't done that in like 2 or 3 years. But he got interested in like bugs and stuff, I think, early, and we got him little bug catcher things, and he would make little terrariums for bugs and try to keep them alive for a bit, and then we'd let them go. And because usually like we don't really technically know what a bug eats, you know, we'd look it up or something and try to find something. But I guess it's been in the works for a while. I didn't make that connection, but then suddenly he just was like, I want an ant farm, and I'm like, I don't know, man. And of course his mom, my wife, is like, no, I do not want ants in the house. He's going to knock it over and they're going to get everywhere. I'm like, nah, I'll just make sure the cats aren't anywhere near them. It'll be fine. They're cool. Although it's kind of dark. Apparently your ants just eventually just die. Like, you feed them, it gives you food, but they don't like live forever. I mean, they just kind of live for however long they live. They don't have a queen, so they just work. That's my understanding. I mean, maybe they send a queen with you, but that's not what most of the packaging and the people's responses are like. Yeah, it's cool for a while because the ants will do their ant hill and then they'll die. You don't have to get a new ant colony. And I was like, oh, that's kind of sad. They just work. They're just like, don't know where they are. They just start working, eating. I guess that's ants. A magnifying glass. Oh, yeah. That's so cruel, you know? But I hate to say I've done that, but I think I did do that when I was a kid. I think that's pretty cruel. And they can live a lot more extreme temperatures anyways, but you're basically like boiling them. It's horrible. But yeah, anywho, the ants are going to be coming soon once the weather gets better. They said don't order the ants when it's cold outside because they might die in transit. It's like, goodness gracious. I've never put so much thought into ants in my life. So yeah, I don't know about cannabis. I'm sure the stocks will get boosted on that news. And there's a dime a dozen. I mean, there's tons of them. So if you're looking at cannabis stocks, if that did happen, I'm sure it would be a big deal for that market. So Amazon getting into it just means a huge avenue for buyers and sellers. What a world, man. Just think about that. It's crazy, dude. Because, like, so many people are in jail, in prison, I should say, for weed, for marijuana. It's just ridiculous prison sentences, too, for some of these people. Like, half their life because of, possession and distribution or whatever. Usually possession's not as bad as selling. But it's crazy to think about now, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, now we're just buying and selling it on Amazon like it's anything else. Like, oh my gosh. I guess it's like when we had prohibition or whatever in the U.S. It's probably the same thing. Just people like going crazy, moonshiners starting NASCAR, just trying to run moonshine around to people who want to buy it. And then, like, not that long later in history, it's legal again, and all the moonshiners are just, I don't know, where they let go, I don't know. In prison, I have no idea. It's just so weird, man. You're like, it's not weird, Booksy. It's just how things are. I know. But the idea of it being on Amazon just gave me a really good chuckle. I hope if that happens, and it really does, I don't know if they'll ever, I don't know what's going to be the case on a federal level, but I don't know how that works, but like, I just don't know. I'd have to look into it. Like, obviously, if something's litigated on a federal level, that they usually have to they say whether or not it's up to the states. Like, they'll say, oh, this is the law and it's not up to the states or whatever. This is a universal thing. Or it's like giving allowances or taking them away to the state level, which is big government at its best and at its worst, I guess. And sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's not. But I guess that's where it would have to go, right? Because, like, right now, it's legal in some states. Am I wrong? So, like, if it were a federal thing, it would just become, what, legal, like, everywhere? People will steal more packages. You're probably not wrong. Yep. If they find out you're smoking weed at your house, they'll start looking for your packages. Can you get Titan Myrma giganteum ants via the mail? I don't want to get an ant that can punch through the ant glass. So if that's what you're talking about, I don't want that. Some kind of Hulk ant that's just like able to like crack open the glass and like escape. It's not my thing, man. Also, the ant farms are like built for certain kinds of ants. So I don't think you can take just any old ant and put it in there. I think it has to be the right size. I think if it's too, I don't know, maybe it's like a 1/2 inch. So as long as it's not that big. Yeah, I don't doubt it. I don't doubt that the economy is, I mean, any kind of new market is going to be a good thing, at least in the beginning. And eventually it kind of just works its way into the like everyday kind of expectations for people. But yeah, obviously that would boost the market or the economy in that particular region to have like a new product that could be bought and sold. But I think about like how that same thing kind of happened with the and I don't particularly like them. I'm not gonna judge you if you do it, but the I promise. But the God, what are those things called? The vaping. So technically, vaping didn't completely, erase smoking, but certainly, like the cigarette industry got like pummeled by it, by the technology, and more people than not vape now than smoke cigarettes because they think that it's significantly better for you and yada yada yada. Although there's still like a whole slew of other problems, like people getting pneumonia because they're filling their lungs with vapor and other things like that. And it's still nicotine, it's still addictive. And you can make your nicotine stronger. I know they always say like, well, you can make it weaker too. Yeah. But it's kind of like that, because like I remember when all the vape shops, everybody probably knows this because everybody lives in a town and somewhere. All the vape shops are opening up everywhere, and you're like, really? Another vape shop? I thought that was going to be something more interesting. It's just another vape shop. But those guys ended up probably making bank, because it's like this new thing, and I'm sure they made tons of money. They still do. And what's smart about it is, unlike cigarettes, it's like customized type stuff with these like technology things. People love buying technology. Cigarette's just a cigarette. Vaping, you can have accessories. It's funny. It's all just business, man. To the people behind the scenes. All just business. So they'll make like marijuana vaping, and then they'll do the same thing. Yeah, I mean, of the two, I think it's relatively like, compared to alcohol, it's seen as relatively benign. I've shared with you guys in the past, like we had two guys in high school. They were classmates of mine. This was back in whenever. And I don't know when it was, but they died in a car accident and were both really high. And they just went off of a road. I mean, the thing is like, anything that dulls your senses, right, is an inhibitor, and they talk about, or a depressant, it can be. And I don't think they consider cannabis a depressant, but it is an inhibitor. It can be very like relaxing, mellowing. And certainly if you had like too much of that and you got behind the wheel, it's still driving under an influence. And then DUI is universal. I mean, you can get a DUI with drugs technically, but it's most common, obviously, when people talk about that, they're talking about usually alcohol. But like, you could be under the influence of like a number of things, it's not just one thing or another. So I understand what you're saying, but yeah, it is a little bit of a double standard, I suppose, when you look at it compared to like crack or methamphetamines, right? And so on and so forth. Oxy, I mean, that's a big one, right? These are like medical, some of these were like medicinal, Some of them still are, but I mean, that's probably why we like have to just keep doing research on stuff and see how it affects the body. Because even if you didn't, engage in that and you're like, well, I don't really want to do drugs or whatever. That's totally up to you, and I think that's fine, you know. And there's health reasons why you wouldn't do it for some people. For other people, it's like maybe there's good purposes for it. I know that seizures, it's a big deal. Marijuana and seizures, it really helps people. Um, it can be very good for some folks who have high anxiety and leads to depression and stuff. So there's definitely like medical reasons to use something like that. But at the same time, without having it being legalized, the research is kind of just like, I don't want to say it's been skewed, but it probably has been mostly skewed towards the negative side as opposed to what's the positive side of it. There's not really a whole lot of positive side to alcohol, except, again, like maybe, I don't even know what positive is there to alcohol. There's really not really much. It's kind of just poison. One of the things that was positive about alcohol was preservatives, because like the monks that famously like made beer and all that stuff, it was cleaner than water at that time because it was a way of, and it kept longer. You could keep it, and you weren't likely going to get. It was made for hydration, even though it still technically dehydrates you. You know what I mean? Anyways, the ideas behind that were somewhat solid. I mean, thinking about canned goods and fermented goods and stuff like that, it made sense. It makes sense. I don't know. I'm not gonna. I guess that's a lot of conversation for not this stream. So you should probably just leave it at that. But I'd be curious. What I was saying is, I'd be curious to see if it becomes legalized. I'd be curious, like universally or whatever, to see how that research develops over time, and there'll be both positive and negative. Like, here's somebody that's done it for their whole life, right? Okay, you know, how has it affected their brain? How has it affected this or that? And then you have more of a cost and a benefit analysis to it. Because like people that are pro marijuana, cannabis, whatever it is, because cannabis is like, they're also like CBD oils and other stuff. It's not just, you know, smoking the reefer, man. It's not just that. It's also a lot of things, medicines. I think the people that are pro those things usually already have like a laundry list of like, here's the benefits of it. And then it's pretty easy to then look at that and say, well, then it should be legal. But there are negatives to it. I mean, there's reasons why, you know, to some degree. Not just because people were, you guys are like, no, man, it's all about social structures and keeping people, and I don't know, we could talk about that for like days and days and days. We really could. Yeah, I think that's going to get political and even racial at some point, if you can get to the bare bones of the drug war kind of stuff. Anyways, I would like to see it legalized because I know that there are people that I know that have needed that, who have epilepsy, and I know it's a really, really, really good one for that. But also, I just think it's absurd to spend as much money as we spend to keep people in prison. You know, we're spending insane amounts of money, the price to keep people in prison, huge prison populations. And people, and my neighbor, you don't know him, so I could talk about him. He was in jail for 9 years. And that's just crazy to me. 9 years of his life gone because of marijuana. And you're like, well, just don't do drugs, man. It's illegal. I know it was illegal. I know it was against the law. I'm not saying he shouldn't have had consequences just for breaking the law, but like 9 years of his life? Come on. 9 years. You only live once. That's a huge chunk of your life. For a bunch of, leaves rolled up in a piece of paper. I just like, come on, dude. That's where I'll get my fire lit. This is like, we need to decrease our prison population, and we need to stop punishing people after they get out of prison too. Like, get on parole. It's ridiculous how much recidivism there is because of people being punished after the punishment is technically supposed to be done. It's just crazy. But who knows, man? Now we've got like a dude with like felonies on his rap sheet in the Oval Office. Maybe something will change. He's run on a position of like pro-police, conservative. It's just so strange. Such a strange world we live in. Oh, man. They're like, Booksy, you a bleeding heart? No, I'm just just a pragmatist. Oh, man, there's so many people that can't get work because of... I mean, a felony charge is a felony charge, but it's like... It's in the past. It's in the past. I mean, if they've changed their life, they've changed their life. But if you don't give them the opportunity, then how in the world are they supposed to move forward? They can't go back. They can't undo what they did. That's not possible. It's the only opportunity they have. The only thing they can do is just keep moving forward. There's so many people I talk to that have turned their life around after, something like that. And like, they still face like garbage, like left and right. It's like ridiculous. I just can't. And there's a lot of really crazy stuff going on right now. There was a law that was trying to be passed. I forget what it was called. I have to look it up again, but it was last September. It was for that very purpose. It was basically like, we need to stop throwing people back in jail because they get out on probation and then they have a probation violation that's really not a big deal, but they get out on probation and then they have like a technicality and they get thrown back in jail on a technicality, and it's like, you're just wasting taxpayer dollars. And it was even supported by like police organizations because they're like, yeah, because the court system doesn't look at the individual, they just look at the bottom line. These people can't afford representation, so they go in and they end up, you had a violation, so you're going to go back to jail for X amount of time. It's like, well, now you've got overpopulation in the probation, and they have to deal with that because now they've got tons more people and they're understaffed, and it's just ridiculous. There's a lot going on. Hopefully that'll fix that, but you read about the people, it's like, it's some ridiculous amount. It's like a really high number. It's like 90-something%. It's crazy high of actual like return to prison incidents. It was well over 50. It had to be between 60 and 90 because I remember the number was like really high, or actually just because of technicalities. It have nothing to do with anyone committing another crime. That would, like, imagine that. Like, so basically what you're saying is like 60% of the people who go back to jail after getting out of jail, it's not because they committed another crime, it's because they messed up on their probation. That's crazy. And that's coming out of taxpayer dollars to pay for people to go back. Our system is so bloated. It's ridiculous. It really is. Those aren't made up statistics. I promise. Talk about stocks, Booksy. That's why we're here. Well, anyways, that was a bit of an aside. We were talking about marijuana and what that would do for something like Amazon, how that affects everything, and how bizarre it is to think about all the people that it would change their lives, because if it's no longer illegal, then I would imagine those sentences would be scrubbed if it was just marijuana. So you'll have people flipping out. But, in the end, those are opinions of mine. Some of it I think is factual. Some of it's just an opinion. It's kind of a dead morning after getting on. So I was really kind of hoping we would see something else happen here on AMC. I didn't really see any major movement until maybe this afternoon, but it's really been very flat, quite literally flat. So we need to see the market push up, and this could be a very simple, straightforward SOS. I know I talk about cat ears all the time, and you guys might get so annoyed because I'm like, well, not everything's a cat ear, right? It's not. The problem that I find, I guess, the most often with the quote-unquote cat ear, it's just a goofy way of kind of describing what we see as a wedge often. It's not always a cat ear, and one of the things that's hard to understand is that it could go both ways. And I think when it's interesting, because I remember talking to somebody about, I can't remember what the stock was, but about a rising wedge or something like that, just a flag, which is what this looks like, And you look at that and you think to yourself, well, it's just a flag, right? It could just break to the upside. Yes, it could. And the thing about a flag is that, interestingly, whether he knew it or not, and I don't know, he's still alive, but, Bolkowski does the flag, and it's usually 30% or something. It's not a huge breakout target. But what's interesting about the 30% flag target that you see with Bolkowski stuff is that oftentimes it just barely comes back. The actual breakout target isn't the pole, because a pole breakout is supposed to be a long-term pole. Most people think that the pole is a guaranteed win-win because it's the 50-50, right? Well, if it's an S-curve, when it breaks out, it will go the pole's length, right? Yeah, technically it'll go the pole's length if it breaks out on strength if it's an S-curve, because that would be a halfway point. But it's not a very good measurement tool because it's inconsistent at low time frames. So you basically have this sort of misunderstanding in the market. I hear it a lot with the flag because it's one of the most common patterns. It's a consolidation pattern that it's necessarily going to break out and do this kind of bigger move, and it does not. And what I find it to be interesting because I'm kind of a nerd, but also because mathematically it's strange to me to think about that the Bolkowski target, oftentimes, if it breaks out late in the range, the Bolkowski target will actually only predict it coming back slightly above the top. And the reason I find that to be interesting is because that's the statistical probability. He's just using numbers. He's just saying out of 1,000 times this has happened, 30% of the time it hits this target. It's this. So this is a very reliable or whatever. You know what I mean? Or more often than not, it hits this target, and you have X amount of reliability on that target. So it's the highest percentage target hit. So if you had a wave of targets up here, this would be the highest percentage target that would be hit. I think it's fascinating because it almost always is back to the top. And if it's steep, sometimes it's only back to one of these little ledges, which are the cat ears. So the reason I'm saying that is because in the event that this broke out, you might think, well, it's going to definitely go then. Well, there's more to it than that. You have to kind of look at a wedge and decide whether or not that breakout is significant. One, if it's just in the middle of nowhere and it's not that important, well, it may not have a big reaction. It may only go to the top. And if it only goes to that recent top, that's very, very much a possible shoe-in for one of two things. Either the SOS with a backup, right, which could then go later, or it could be a UT, UTAD situation, and if it slides back beneath the creek, then you're dunsies, right? And we've seen this plenty of times at this point, but it's weird how hand in hand it is with what Bolkowski just uses statistically and what Wyckoff uses anyways. They're not really that distinct. They're actually very similar. So I just think it's a really fascinating point to make, is that in reality, like, this doesn't guarantee you're going to break above this creek. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. It sort of implies to me, if this broke out late, it could be like near a double top if it doesn't break out until this afternoon versus like going right up right now. So the consolidation continues and it breaks out this afternoon. You may only come back to the top. That puts it in a different perspective. Then you have to have the backup that holds, right? So on and so forth. And that's how we would see the M cross go over. And all that stuff is linked to like sine waves and stuff like that too. So pretty fascinating. So then this would not necessarily break out until maybe Wednesday. It could be really boring. And that's assuming that it doesn't come back down for whatever reason to check something else, because it technically broke out here. So at this point, for AMC, what do I think is most likely? I think what's most likely, if I'm going to just pick like one thing, this is possible. I think this is a possibility here. But I actually think what's probably most likely, I wish it wasn't the case, but I think what's most likely is that this actually probably distributes again, because I imagine on the 15-minute it's going to get overbought when it pumps up. And it's going to come back down through these creeks, and then it's going to drop back down low. And part of the reason I think that might happen is because on the big picture, this looks like a nice 1-2, but doesn't have the downside. Now, I love to be like hyper bullish on this and just say, no, it's just going to go like right up to that creek and break out. I wish I could say that, but a lot of times AMC just doesn't do that. So like one way or another, I would not be surprised. This would cause me the least amount of surprise. Let's put it that way. If it broke down here and went back to retest like 306, and then tomorrow, if it can hold that test, it looks like there's another mark here maybe. Yeah, it's right on the intersection there too. You see that? That wedge is coming right to a point sort of like an hour before close. It will be like a pivot. It's not like the most important thing in the world. I'm just saying it'd probably be a pivot point for this, one way or the other. And then, maybe it will come up first. I guess it would be most surprising if it just went straight up and broke out. Like just went right up here. That just seems really unlikely to me, based on the way this setup is. So this M looks like it just needs to make a higher low, is all I'm trying to say. So this would be the most likely situation, in my opinion, is that it jumps the creek and then it comes back to intersect a low. And maybe it's today, maybe it's first thing tomorrow. But I think this is the most likely thing that will happen. And then the two tops here, this turns into a, shoot, man, it might even be Thursday. Like end of the day Wednesday. And then Thursday, we really don't get great Thursdays. Thursday's almost always kind of garbage, but this sort of makes me think it could be a really good Thursday if that happens. So you come back up Thursday, 1, 2, and then break out. And that would be the bigger breakout. So this should be the first M. Dang it. Where's Monday? They could leave it to Monday. Of course. Why not? You never really know what's in the mind of the operator per se, but if the goal is to trade below here, then I think this is how I'd do it. So it may look like I'm making up lines, but I'm not. They're already there. This is the parallel. So if it holds as the wave and the ascension here breaks, then you're going to come back down. This would be the cross right here. So you'd hit over there on Wednesday, right around 308, which is the previous floor here. So it's like a retracement of this pop. So it pops, redistributes, come back down to 308. And then I don't think it's going to get to the bottom. I don't know. I can't be 1,000% sure, but to me this looks like the intersection is at 294. It's like worst case, I don't know. Maybe it happens on next week or something on Monday. There's like a gap down or something. It drops, hits that. Yeah. But then a lot of times this establishes that it's going to follow through, but we do see a breakdown anyways, which is frustrating, but it does happen quite a bit again on AMC. I know you're like, well, this is one thing after the next after the next. How can you be sure? Well, it can't be. I mean, there's always like 1,000 different ways it could go. Pick a direction, right? But like, this is often like a really common occurrence for AMC. Is to establish that trend and then break it, and then it finds like a lower bottom. And this is how you can sort of delay a move going into next week. And what that becomes is that's a middle of the S-curve kind of move. Weirdly enough, this then turns into the probable target come like Monday. Yeah, so this is where it finally pushes the creek, tries to jump, but it fails, something like that. And Monday it goes really far, and this is how it gets back up above. So all that does is it generates like a wave. I don't know. It's the timing of this up versus the down. Then you'd have like the wave count here. I think that at that point, you really want to see continuation. You don't want to see it like chunk back down. Because if that happens, and it's possible, this could just go right back to the bottom again. If it doesn't build out with enough strength and break out above, that's when you would get like a gap fill. You guys are like, well, that's the opposite of what you said. You're saying that could go down into... Again, it really would be 100% dependent on this, the second move here. Assuming it goes down, that's not necessarily going to happen. So first of all, I don't know if that's going to happen. But if it does happen and this chops downward this week, then in order for it to break out, it has to kind of break above and then hold. And then you should get a really solid move all the way back up to 360. Yeah. The alternative is a lot better, so there's another potential here, which is like an ascending accumulation. So on the 15-minute, to me, it looks like it's kind of hooking up, but I'm betting that lower time frames, no, that looks the same. That's much the same. Let's look at like the 1 hour. It's already at like 50. Ugh. Yeah, I don't like that. Definitely looks like it could be setting up for like another drop here to like find the support again on that breakout. Going into Friday, it's definitely a possibility. I guess what would be best is if it jumps over early this week, like Wednesday, and then it comes up probably to... It would either be 335 or 345. Either one of those levels would work. and then it comes back down. So it still does the sell-off, but it does it higher up, and then the sell-off doesn't, it does come all the way down, but it gets oversold more quickly. So it's stronger, and it comes back down into Friday, but it's above the floor here. So the reason why that would be stronger is because I think that would represent 1, 2, 3, 4. We're still missing 4. I don't know. This doesn't seem super likely then. One, 2, 3, 4, and then right back up. You guys are like, this isn't really helpful. Well, what I'm trying to do is kind of in my head is establish continuity. What would make the most sense based on everything going on. Honest to goodness, this could just melt up tomorrow, because if it breaks above 320, then it's just going to go. You know, you don't have to like overthink it. But typically what we see is that this is like a 1, 2, and then there's a 3, 4, and I don't see 4 yet. So I feel like there's going to be some kind of a backup somewhere. So unless during this 3, this goes way up high, and then 4 comes back down, right? Unless that happens, which isn't, in my opinion, isn't super likely. Unless that happens, then it's more likely that 4 is going to come back here and hit this low first. And so if that's the case, clean this up a bit. Then the only real like good that could come of this, I suppose, is if there's no sign of weakness right here. So if this second drop comes lower than the first, it would then push higher and then drop low. And that's how you get the Friday low. You could technically break Monday, but it would have like this kind of fake out. So go low first after making a rebound here. It come lower, and then it would drop again. Go back down towards 3 going into Friday. So what would be stronger is if it holds higher, and this basically then breaks out and over. I don't know. At that point, you really could end up much higher on Monday. I think there's just an option here that's just a lot stronger, I guess, than the other. We'll have to wait it out. But the wave in general usually gives you plenty of indication of strength or weakness in the break and in the turn. If the turn up is fast, I don't think we're as great of a risk of like breaking back through again. If we develop weaknesses here, I don't want to say it's all but guaranteed, but it's basically all but guaranteed. So if we develop another SOW here, that's where the 292 comes into play for the following week, and it's ugly. And so then that pivot turns into like that February 14th mark that we saw turns into like a pivot point. Well, does that mean we're going to be low then? Well, I think it means that, yeah, possibly, but it also could put us on a lower trajectory too, which is also kind of a bummer. Because if the wave is breaking down low like that and it doesn't break out, if it goes out and over, then it really gives you a huge amount of time potentially to go sideways down bottom, because that becomes like a pivot on like a bigger volley here. And we may not be moving until March, that kind of thing. So I'd be screwed for sure if that happened. And it's not looking terrible, but I don't like that 1 hour is already like at the 50 on RSI. I mean, we haven't even moved anywhere. It's just getting bought in too fast. So I don't know. My gut's telling me not to worry about it, because the setup here with like these creeks and junk. I don't know. It seems like it would favor going back to 350 at this point, not coming back down and staying low. So even if that happened, I would still think it would go like right back up, potentially to like 350. I just don't see a lot that supports like staying low at this point right here. Maybe later, but it'd have to build out. And then there's no other creeks really until you get way back up here. So between there and between where we are, 350, and then from like 350 to like 420, except for that 290, or excuse me, that 390 area, which is just a floor, but that's like it. That's just a natural like support and resistance. So, no, he definitely knew what he was doing. It's aggressive negotiating. You don't have to be a fan of it to know that that's probably what he was doing. It doesn't matter what your opinion is. When you're bringing people to the table and you're putting them in a position of weakness, basically, where they feel like they're having to react. So he's coming with a position of strength, like he's threatening to do this, like it's already been put into action. He can just write it on a piece of paper and it'll happen. That sends a big signal out, and then they all respond. He sees how they respond. He gauges their response. So now they're in a position of weakness. They've basically he's forced their hand, so to speak. You guys are like, you're giving him way too much credit, Booksy. No, there's not that many things I give Donald Trump credit for. I'm not a huge fan. But the guy's a businessman. He didn't make, he obviously started with like $1 million or something. He started with a lot of money. He says he started poor, but I think his dad gave him like $1 million or something. The point is that he knows how to run a business. He runs businesses very successfully. He's a very shrewd negotiator. It doesn't really matter if you like him or not. It's hard to deny that, right? So do I think that he did it intentionally? Oh, yeah. If there's one thing that he would do intentionally, it's to kind of bait out a response in like a trade deal. He filed bankruptcy 6 times. Maybe so. What's his net worth right now? I'm not saying that he's gonna get what he wants. I'm not saying that he's gonna ultimately win either. But what I'm saying is that the idea of him like not knowing what he's doing in that particular instance, I don't care about anything else, but in the trade negotiation, him like immediately going in and like saying these things and then quote unquote punking out or whatever, I don't think he punked out. I don't think it's about whether I like him as a candidate or I like him as a person or I like him as a president. I think it's just a simple, in my opinion, I think that's just him. Like, I think that's how he operates. So it would be like, you got guys in those, what's that? The shark, you get guys who are in any of those guys in that show. What's it? The Shark Tank show. You watch those guys negotiate. That's like their whole business is just learning how to elicit responses that are favorable. He probably also was aware that his repercussions might hurt the market. And I think that's a part of like the quickness of it. It did hurt the market. But if you're trying to get your competition, and that's how he sees everybody, I guess, is competition. If you're trying to get your competition, I don't know why, because Canada and Mexico shouldn't be our competition, really. But that's the way he feels about it. And some people think that it is competition because of the jobs and all that stuff. And like imports, exports are skewed. Like we definitely get a lot more stuff than we export, like on the whole. So make no mistake, like while it does hurt us, it would hurt them more just based on just pure numbers. Hopefully he's trying to kind of bring back jobs, quote unquote, to America. But you can't do that unless you do some kind of leveling of the playing field. I don't want to get into this too much, but like I had a lot of time to think on a really long trip on the Christmas break. And again, I'm not going to sit here and say that I love Donald Trump. That's just not my personal opinion, okay? So you're going to have to just accept that I'm not a big fan of his. But at the same time, I was thinking about the idea of tariffs, and I was thinking about how that was one of the things that he talked about a lot. And I was like, well, at this point, he already won the presidency. He's going to be in office. And you're looking at the situation as it is in China. And one of the things I was thinking about was like, if you think from the more basic standpoint of economy development and growth, one of the reasons why we're like so jacked up compared to China in terms of prices is because we kind of, I don't want to say we let them off easy. I don't think we left them off easy. But we made it almost impossible for American companies to compete. And that's why there's very few American companies that make everything in America. We export so much of our labor to other countries. And part of that is like, you also think about like Chinese goods, and like the things that are made there are also distributed from there, and then they're sold here back to us. So we're like exporting the labor to them to make stuff for us, so then the consumers then buy it here. And I don't want to say tariffs are like the only part of this. They're not. But it would make sense if you're thinking about competition that there's really no reason that it should be that cheap for another country to make goods and then sell it back to us. And I know that could really hurt people for a short while, like for sure. Because if you start implementing tariffs like immediately, well, obviously the price of your goods just goes up. It's that simple. But like, this is something that I think probably should have been done over the last 50 years because China has done nothing but grow as an economy. So it doesn't make any sense when you look at China now and you look at how massive it is and the industries that they have now, especially with this like this deep thing that came out, DeepSeek, I don't know what it's called. And it's like the capabilities, like it should have been, all right, so I guess what I'm saying is if China were really as developed as the US, and I think some people would say it is, and some people would say it isn't, okay? As a consumerist economy, are they as consumerist as we are? I don't know. I'd have to look at numbers. But the point is, like, eventually you would think that would happen. Like, they would come into competition, and that's happening, right? We're coming into competition with China, right, a lot. Why would there be a disconnect between the price of goods then if they're supposedly the same? Like, there shouldn't be, and yet there still is. So you would raise the cost of goods coming from China, but then you also have to have like a competitor here in America who can then meet the same standards. So if you raise tariffs, okay, well, a Chinese product that used to be worth $3 is now $6 because they pass it on to the consumer, of course. You know, it's harder for them. They have to pay more. They're not necessarily making more money just because they're charging you more. But now that the product is $6 and it's made in China, it could technically, just as a bare bones, compete with a product that's $6 made in America. Used to be that Chinese product, because it was cheaper, was like cheaper to make, cheaper to distribute, was like $3. So in theory, it hurts the consumer for sure. It would have to hurt the consumer if it all happened at once. But in reality, like I thought about it and I was like, if this had happened like long term and the prices were instead of like, hey, we're getting stuff for super cheap, let's do that, let's enjoy that. What we basically did is we ran ourselves out of competition, because we essentially we created an environment where the consumer can get really cheap products, like Walmart, right, can get like super cheap stuff to the consumer and sell it in bulk, even Costco, whatever. You look at these places and it's like Sam's Club. It's like these are just bulk operations from cheaper places. People love cheaper stuff, so they buy it. It's cheaper. You're basically just running Americans out of business with your own business model. So not only is labor going overseas and then you're pumping it back to the consumer, but then your consumer is like forced to choose between a more expensive American-made product and this cheaper Chinese product. And they're going to pick the Chinese product maybe 70% of the time. I don't know what the numbers are. That doesn't make any sense. There should have been some drive at some point. Like it seemed like nobody realized until it had already happened. And it's been happening since the Industrial Revolution. It's not like a new thing. But it's like, at some point, someone should have realized that while this global market does make things cheaper for Americans, while we're earning more, if suddenly Americans don't have jobs and they're not earning more, it just puts a really big imbalance on our own country's economy. It's really messed up. I thought about it a long time. I don't know all the ins and outs of that stuff, and I'm talking about a long time, because I had like 16 hours in the car. You guys you thought about it too much. But it's true in some ways. Like there are definitely things that we are good at. Like some of our farming industry is still pretty strong and feeds like a huge portion of the world. But like there's a huge disconnect in some products, and I'm like, you can't bring it back. Like Donald Trump went and won a huge amount of the vote in these little small towns and like that are more conservative in these country towns. And if you read the book Hillbilly Elegy, okay, Elegy, whatever you want to pronounce it. Read that book, because if you haven't read it and you're thinking about, especially if you're a liberal and you don't understand the culture that voted Donald Trump in to office, there's a huge amount of interesting stuff in that book that really challenges your ideas of what that particular population, like what those struggles actually are, and why there's a disenfranchisement and why there's kind of a disconnect in like certain areas, right? And so, especially if you're like not conservative, read that book. It's a really interesting book. Basically, you have all these generational job losses in like steel mills and places like that. My grandfather worked in a steel mill when he was young. That steel mill is not there anymore, right? But that used to be like a really common thing. If you didn't have quote unquote skilled labor, which I think most labor is skilled, I think aside from a few things that you can learn like in one day, most things take some amount of skill. But the unskilled labor used to have access to a lot of different jobs and stuff that they just don't have access to anymore. And these towns where people they didn't have jobs, they just moved. They would just go to where the jobs are, right? And when people think about like the deep South and the South, especially like the Southeast, they think about all these like rednecks and hillbillies and stuff. And it's generational poverty is really what it became. It started as, and you guys are like, well, they weren't poor. They were slave owners and plantation owners. Yeah, that wealth is there, but it's like a really small percentage of the population. And I've lived in Georgia. I've lived in North Carolina. Like, I've been in that region of the world a huge portion of my life. There's definitely an intense amount of poverty, and it's white people who generationally, like, they did not have access. They no longer had access to things, and then the education's not there. So there's no change in the education. They weren't prepared to go into a new world job force. It's really strange. So, like, the book that I recommended, the Hillbilly Elegy book, is really good because he talks about how he kind of, quote unquote, escaped through his education, like that environment. But he talks about his family, and he has like this drunk uncle, and he's got this other lady who's like would be considered like a welfare queen, and like talks about this disconnect that his family had him moving around to like Kentucky and all these other places, and how they're trying to get to these jobs, and then they just eventually they get stuck. They can't go anywhere else, and they're just poor. And it just kind of opened my eyes to, like, there's a disenfranchisement that those folks feel, right or wrong. You know, the idea of then turning around and telling people, like, you have white privilege doesn't connect to that group. Like, it doesn't, and I'm not going to say I'm part of that group, but it doesn't register with them because they don't understand that idea of, like, again, that's like the main liberal thing is like, well, you're white, you have the advantages. But like, to most of those people, yeah, maybe they generationally used to have wealth. And this is one of those things that goes back to like slavery, because I know that we talked about this in U.S. history a long time ago when I was in that class. I remember that. How, like, from an economic standpoint, slavery, the abolition of slavery really hurt a huge amount of people in the South because, again, I'm not advocating slavery is a good thing. It's not at all. But, like, from just a pragmatic standpoint, if you owned slaves and then suddenly you didn't, you would be at a loss, essentially. You have no labor, and then the only thing you can do is pay your laborers. And it's not like everybody out there was, like, mega plantation owners, you know? Some of those people were like, oh, I worked for the plantation owner, you know, oh, boo-hoo, you know, so on and so forth. We shouldn't feel bad for these people, yada, yada, yada. I don't necessarily agree or disagree. It's a huge conversation. But, like, it's interesting to see, like, how there's a huge percentage of the population that I want to say they're left behind, but they're kind of in this gap, that vacancy, basically. And then you wonder why there's all these extreme views that take hold, like the Charlottesville thing, and you got basically neo-Nazis marching in the street. And it's like, I totally get it. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I think it's horrible. I think anybody that waves a Nazi flag or whatever is a complete and total idiot, right? And it's horrible. It's a crime. It was crimes against humanity. I mean, it's the worst possible thing ever. But when you have like a vacancy like that, there's going to be something that fills the void. And there's going to be voices that come in and say, this is what the real problem is. South Park joked about it with they took our jobs. Remember that? They took our jobs. And they were poking fun at that population group, basically saying that, like, they're just whining because immigrants are coming in and they're cheaper labor. But these are people that they had nothing to begin with at this point. It's like all they had was their job. So how did Donald Trump get elected president? And is he right or wrong to, you know, and I know that you guys are like, well, yeah, but my uncle or whoever, my aunt voted for Donald Trump. She's like a rich white lady or something. I'm not going to get into like every little, like, why did this person this person that? But I think that the overall message of like draining the swamp, so to speak, like these are people that don't represent you, that totally get it. Like I totally see where that came from. And even within like minority populations, he basically won the swing states this time that were essentially minority votes. Like, he won over like a huge percentage of like young voters and Hispanics and black people. You know, it's weird to think about it as just a racial thing. So when I looked at the tariff stuff, I was like, I don't like him as a candidate. I've already said that. And I don't agree with necessarily him being our president. I can't say I do. But I totally understand why the tariff thing makes sense. But it's really something that should have been happening to keep labor and keep costs kind of competitive. And it's like we just basically like screwed ourselves over. And I hate that, because then it's like now you have to shoot yourself in the foot, because you have to shoot yourself in your other foot because you shot yourself in the first foot. You shot yourself in the first foot by not keeping jobs competitive in America. That didn't happen overnight. That happened over like a century, right? Literally like a century. Since, we're in the 2025s now. You think about the 1930s and the 1940s with the world wars. It's coming up, man. It's going to be around the corner. It's like, we're really close. It's like that Industrial Revolution. It's going to be a century old before you know it. It's like those kinds of things are long term. I was thinking like how if in the last 50 years, what if, right? What if we had like, let's say he wants to do this like 10% tariff. What if in the last like 50 years, we had added like 1%, 1%, 1% over the last 50 years instead of doing it all at once? Would it be very different for America right now? Would we have jobs making some of the products that the Chinese make for a lot less? And would we be competing? I don't know the answer to the question. I couldn't tell you the answer to the question. It's a huge conversation. And I'm not like a macroeconomic kind of guy. I just thinking about like how I like to think about it. And I was just thinking about how like, I wonder if that does make sense. Like we should have done that to begin with. But it's really hard to tell a consumer that they should be paying more for something that they're actually paying less for. Like they're paying too little for it. Especially in an age right now where inflation's going crazy, which kind of makes me chuckle because I'm like, well, maybe that wouldn't have been a problem. But then there's all kinds of other issues we could get into with that. I don't want to get into that. Inflation and yada, yada, yada. So, yeah. I don't know, man. So I'm just being honest with you guys. That was just something I was thinking about a lot. And I'm not going to sugarcoat my feelings about who I'm for or against in terms of like a presidency. I'm just going to be honest with you about it. But I also feel that like it's okay to like be a little bit both. Like I'm obviously very middle of the road politically. I know I am very middle of the road politically. But I was thinking about like how these tariffs seem bonkers to me because the market's reacting like it's some kind of crazy, like it was just bloop down yesterday, and then bloop up today. And it's just like, really? That's what we're going to do? We're going to cause fear and panic and then just reverse it. I mean, it's just stupid in some ways. It's like, come on, stock market. Be a little more resilient than that. But then I also think like I had a really good conversation with my wife because she and I are pretty different politically, and even though I'm very moderate, I tend to be more conservative when it comes to like economic stuff. And she was like, this is probably one of those things we agreed the most on because we talked a lot about the cost of living and like why we think it is. I thought it was a really good conversation. It wasn't particularly volatile. I liked hearing her thoughts about it too. But it was just like, man, we kind of screwed ourselves over as a country. We thought we were doing ourselves a favor by being able to buy more with our money. But in the long run, that comes back to you full circle when you can't produce, you can't compete. Can't believe no one is saying anything in chat right now. Yeah, I looked over and I was like, this is going to be bad. It wasn't that bad. CHSN. I think people are being respectful and they're just letting me talk before they respond. Maybe they're thinking about things, considering what I'm saying. I feel like we have a really healthy adult group in here most of the time. So, and maybe by nature of just being around for a long time, I tend to probably have like-minded people around me without trying to. Like, I know that some of y'all are really conservative and you probably voted for Donald Trump. I know some of y'all are very like liberal, as you would say, and probably voted against him. And I'm okay with either one because it's your choice, it's your vote. And being in the middle, I tend to kind of play to both sides anyways at different topics. But this tariff thing is a really good question. And then before you kind of like maybe do what I did, I just thought about it for a long time. And I was like, it seems really basic to me, you know, that we probably should have already had higher prices coming from China for a long time. And now their like economy is more and more and more, it's looking like ours, you know? Shoot, this whole Apple thing, remember Apple? And I was like worried about Apple not doing well at earnings. You want to know why? It's because all this China stuff. Because they said, China stuff. It's all them Chinese folks. Yeah, wear that ignorance with pride, Booksy. No, it's because the analysts were saying that in China, Apple wasn't doing as well. Even though it's like made there, they're not buying as much. But then it ended up being that was wrong. They did really well. And everybody was like, whoops, we were wrong. Maybe, or you were just deliberately driving the prices down. Or so I would like to think. Except they did, though. I mean, did they or didn't they? I don't know. I mean, the history is built upon generations, so every generation leads to the next. So something changed, but everybody's kind of responsible. I hear a lot of people say, like, the greatest generation wouldn't have done this, wouldn't have done that. I definitely think there's a little bit of both, but I think probably you're right. I don't want to blame the baby boomers either. That's my parents, their generation. They were kind of late to the baby boomer party, but that generation is very different than this one. Like the way that they really, the baby boomer generation really got the best of everything. I mean, if you think about it, aside from some of the crappy wars and junk that they had to fight in, some of them fought in, it's like they kind of got all the technological advances in the in the last 70 years. It's like, that's crazy. And so I don't know, man. That was a different time, and it makes sense too when you think about they had bigger families, you're feeding more mouths, like all these things would be a really attractive environment for like, hey, we're going to get cheaper lollipops, as you said. You know, my grandparents, yeah, they would be like great grandparents at this point, things like that. It's just really hard to know, because it's like we're doing the same thing right now. Like, we're trying to figure out what's best for the next generation, but there's so many different views on like what's best. And like when people look 20, 30 years down the road, what do they imagine? Some people are imagining, I mean, for me, it was always like flying cars and this and that, but that's kind of like fantasy stuff, you know? It's really more about economics and like debt and all this other stuff. And clearly like our country's debt hasn't been managed. It's just done nothing but grow forever. So, I mean, there's all kinds of weird issues that could come up if you're talking about generational wealth and what that means. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, but the economy stuff that I was just talking about, I didn't say that out of like a hubris, like, oh, they should have done this, they should have done that, like as if they could have known exactly what was going to happen. I don't know. I think that's the difficult thing. There's a few people that wrote really strongly. I can't remember the guy's name right now, but there were two huge ones, huge names on the economics of like social programs versus like free market economies and stuff. I can't remember the names of the guys right now. If you said it, I'd probably recognize it. But they basically wrote the books on these things. And in terms of when people talk about them, they're usually referring to what these people talked about. And yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if either of those sides really could have foreseen exactly what we're dealing with when we talk about buying and selling goods and then not having the jobs we don't even have the stuff to compete. And that was the other thing, is like, even if you get the tariffs in there and it makes the prices of goods similar, it enables competition, but it doesn't fix the problem of like, you still have to have the product. Like, just because you can make a toy here in America for the same price or similar price as you do in China, assuming that's even what would happen, which I don't think it's that simple, you still have to have someone do it. You still have to have the product move back here. So like, your big businesses may not ever do that. You know, it does give mom and pop shops maybe a better fighting chance to some degree. And I think that's the idea of like, well, we're going to deregulate, lower taxes, make it easier for small businesses. That's the concept behind it. Whether or not it's works or doesn't work, that's the economic theory, right? Whether you say yes it does or no it doesn't. But the concept behind it is that like, you're giving mom and pop a better chance of competing. And then if the Chinese products are more expensive, maybe you'll go buy local instead of buying over here. The logic is there. I don't know if it's going to work. I don't think that, the thing is, like, I don't think your Apple is going to start manufacturing phones in America. Maybe they will. If the price is high enough in China. But how in the world, you know? Yeah, Friedman is the one guy. Yep, that's it. Those are the two. Yeah, you got it. Thank you. Somebody who knows what they're talking about. Friedman was the one I was remembering because I was thinking like, it was like, I thought it started with an F, but I couldn't put my name on it or my finger on it. So I don't know. Maybe they wrote about it and said, here's what could happen. But it's just a hugely different world than anything else that we've ever experienced. Somebody mentioned the Silk Road earlier, and like, you talk about like globalized economy, like that was one of the earliest forms of like trading east to west, right? Was the Silk Road. And before that time, you had no real interaction in trading. I mean, it was obviously easier after that. And then later on, you know, shipping and railroads and all that junk got better. But just think about like humanity as a whole. Globalization in a globalized market hasn't really been a thing. Not a huge thing, you know, until the modern era. So it may have been impossible for someone to like foresee it. But I do think it's an interesting question. Like, what if we had been slowly increasing like the price? Because a little bit at a time, it's kind of like the boiling frog, right? A little bit at a time, people don't really care about as much. So 10% is like a lot for China. Like, oh, we're going to drop 10% tariffs or whatever it is on them. I think it was 25% on Canada and Mexico, 10% on China. I could go double check. But over time, that wouldn't have been as big of a deal. If it had been like, oh, we're raising it like 0.0 or 0.25% every year or something over the course of 20 years. That's the same. Not 20 years, that's wrong. 40 years. You know, that would have been very different. And then all of a sudden, I don't know, would that have changed the way things go? It may have for some, but it's almost like the too little too late thing, maybe. Who knows? Especially if they're retaliating. I don't really get the Canada and Mexico thing, I gotta be honest with you guys. Because I feel like Canada especially, it's like, are the prices in Canada significantly cheaper than here? Like, are any of you guys Canadian? Can you tell me, is it cheaper to live there? Like cost of living and stuff? Mexico's kind of the same way. I know that a lot of products get made in Mexico. I don't really see a lot of products made in Canada. No offense, Canadians, but I just don't. I don't know what that's about. Or Europe for that matter. I think Europe's all worried about them now. I'm like, I've bought products that were made in Europe, but like it's not the most common thing. When I look at my price tags, it's always like Indonesia or or China or whatever. Lumber, that would make sense. That would make sense. That's a stereotype I agree with. I mean, all the lumberjacks are up there. I saw it in an X-Men movie, so it must be true. This is the joke, guys. But yeah, you're right. Lumber is the one. Yeah, and lumber's been brutal. Lumber's super expensive. So this is kind of like everything else that we tend to look at, the CHSN, Jason. It's like sort of a mixed bag on different time frames, because I'm seeing like on that, I was looking at the daily and the 4 hour, and I'm seeing that RSI is just in the dumps. I mean, it's just gone. We could probably make an argument based on this trend here that we're somewhere near the middle, possibly, but it's very possible that we're nowhere near it either. It's just kind of a guess, anybody's guess type deal. And I feel like we may have looked at this before, but to me, that's it. So it's very close. If it's not there yet. Yeah, I don't know what happened with this international holding. So it's like a bank. Yeah, you could see like a retracement. Maybe if this goes a little lower, it could retrace back to 155. That's a 50% retracement. Maybe over time it gets there. It's a bakery. That's random. International holding. You saying bakery or bankery? I'm gonna just look it up. I feel like an idiot. Now I've like used all my brain cells, and it's not even. I didn't even make that many good. Chansons are French songs. The word chanson in French is song. Okay, I want chanson international holding. What does Chanson International Holding do? Founded in 2009, Chanson International Holding is a provider of bakery, seasonal, and beverage products through its chain stores in China and the United States. Headquartered in Urumqi, China, Chanson directly operates stores in Xinjiang, China, and New York, United States. So on the 23rd, it tanked from $6.30 down to 48 cents. So what are we thinking? It's saying that the lower floor at negative, what? That's not even possible. What you can learn from Chance and International Holdings. Shares have retraced a considerable 33%. I'm sure that was before this big drop. What happened to them? I mean, I thought that the news about tariffs was like yesterday. This would have been like not at all the same. Okay. Well, you already know what I'm going to say, but it would have appeared to me that this came too low. So like, if I had looked at this earlier, I probably would have suggested this isn't looking particularly strong because of what does seem to me like a cat ear kind of retracement here. Something crazy, but this is a weakness. This breakdown, there's like a double breakdown low here, and then it fails to advance. But I would not have thought it would have come this low. So just to kind of tell you out the bat, I would not have imagined that low. I mean, it's a big drop, but I would have suggested it comes back to like $1, back to this floor at the most. That's the cat ear kind of connector right there. That's usually what happens when it has a distribution like that. The gear goes sideways and it drops down to this wave, which is before the first. There's also a possibility that it doesn't do that and it drops to the second wave, which is right here. So like both of those would have seemed more reasonable to me. I would have not, that to me looks right. It's right where that should be. And then this one, I think it just represents like this bottom region here. So like neither of those make a lot of sense to me, like breakdown wise, that it went significantly lower. I mean, this does look like distribution though. I'm just going to say it. See this like up thrust kind of stuff? These are big wide like push-ups to get to this above $5. And it really looks like above the original price may have been more the aim here, above $4. So anytime it came above 4, this is heavy distribution. So maybe that's the problem, is that this was like, it looks the same. It should have maybe not gone as far, but at the end of the day, the design may have been to drop through here about the 50-50 and do like a flush all the way down. Which does suggest it could go further. Yeah, I mean it's not a guarantee, but it certainly looks like that might be the design here. It's definitely evident in this that was part of the design, but I also think that it's hard to I would not have guessed it would have come this low. I'll just say that. If it were me and I was doing it earlier, I would have said it probably comes down to 278 and then chops here and blah, blah, blah. That's what I would have thought. I do think it would have dropped. I would not have suggested, I would have thought like this and then maybe see what happens. But so as a reaction move, volume is pumped up, sliding quite a bit. I don't think it's going to go significantly lower. I think this is about as low as it's going to go for now. I will say, though, that long term, you might have a bit of a problem here because I think while this may come back up to $1, it's looking to me like that's been set up as the floor. And that's not likely going to break immediately. So a lot like this, when it pumped above 4, I think this is going to spend some time. And I think it may be that this comes even down lower to like 30 cents later. So if it breaks out from 48 to 49, there's a lot of what if statements here, and it could take a little while. It could be up to $1 before too long. So if you're just going to trade the indicators, that might be a easy enough trade just to buy and wait and see. And I think you might get a reaction back up to $1, but I would be surprised if it went higher. And I would not be surprised also if it didn't quite get there, if it hit like 80 cents or something. Because a lot of times when it's dropped through a floor like that, you expect it to hit that top, but you got to go back and look at where the preliminary support actually was. And it's up here. So that major sell down happened right to a low of 83 cents. So 83 cents is more likely going to act as a kind of resistance of some sort as opposed to $1. So I don't even think it gets there. And it's a little bit like what happened with AMC, though, in terms of like the drop. And then, I mean, just as an example, the cat ear drop, a curve down. If it busts back above 55 cents, I think it's likely going to go right up to 83. For all we know, that could be right now. It could be a little bit later. But this seems kind of likely to me if it comes back above here, that this would then go all the way up to the top. And that's not because it looks like AMC. It's just because that's where that reaction would go. So if you want to risk on play, you could trade it. I would say from that point forward, I'm just being honest with you. I don't know. It hasn't done anything yet to get out of there. We're just still in this downward trend. So I would wait at least till that breakout happens. It's not there yet. It's close. So I would suggest to you that if this comes above, let's take a look. If it comes into that gap region around 55, I think you'll be in a decent shape because that's above the creek. At least you have some confirmation, and then it might be very rapid after that. You should get that push back up. Yeah. I mean, this build out's pretty low. Let me see. There's a lot of noise on this chart. So that's a what if question if it breaks out right there. These lower trajectories are kind of pointing way off into the sunset. It's not like super far, but like there's another pivot around the 14th. This has been really common in the market. I keep finding these. I'm not deliberately doing it, so I promise you that, but it's just, it is what it is. So what I just did is I took a measurement of the first drop over here from where that ledge is down to the bottom. And then I'm measuring from the bottom up. And it's suggesting to me that there's some kind of a middle forming around 63, which also makes sense. I'm not sure if I've got it quite right, but what that would tell me is that this is kind of the range that you're in right now. We could also do this and see if that's the middle. So we're pretty close. It is really close to the middle. Yeah, so this is very close to where it needs to be. Okay, so what I would suggest to you is that really from where it is now, the only I would say the only real, I don't know, I don't want to say sure trade, but the only real strong target I could give you is like probably this 63-cent target, because the build out for this doesn't really support like a reaction beyond that right now. It just doesn't. It would be possible that it could come up like a little bit higher. Again, maybe to like 67 cents. It's still a good trade if it makes that move. Yeah, I'm just watching it, dude. The level itself, they're there. But I'm watching to see how now on a micro level it's building out. So on the bigger picture, it's easy to look at the bigger picture and say, oh, it's probably going to react back to the floor. But then when you zoom in, you're like, no, it didn't actually, it may not actually do that because it developed a breakdown here. So the first preliminary support is not at 1. It passed through it. It's at 80 cents. Then this is the length of the breakdown. This is usually that short entry position that's covered later. So there's a short position after it hits that preliminary. I think that's what it is. It's shorted down X amount from here. And then that is the essentially like the same when you cover it later. That's usually what we see as like the build out. So once it breaks that creek, it's a little bizarre way to do it, but I genuinely think this is how it works. So that's the way I would do it. Is that if it can break that creek, that could then be your move. So you can see why I'm not overly optimistic. Like it could have already started. So like the lower end is like 61 cents. The higher end, it's going to be like right in the middle. Maybe like right there at like 70 cents. So that doesn't really give me a huge window. And then when I look at these trajectories, it's pretty straightforward that, yeah, if that were to hold for some reason, it could go right back up towards 80 cents. And maybe that happens, but maybe it doesn't. And you can't really know for sure. And so what would be more likely is that this pushes up and then kind of craps out again. And I think long term, this is going to be your range. So this probably builds out like an auto reaction type deal, and then it comes up again in more or less like a phase B type style. And so later you end up with a creek jump, you come back, and then later on you get the bigger push up. And this isn't that far off. This is like jumping the creek, coming back down to hold it. that could come very low. That could come all the way back down to, frankly, like where it starts here. A lot of times that's what happens, weirdly enough, is it's like a retrace. So if that's where the breakout is, right at like 49 cents, it would not surprise me if it comes all the way back to 49 cents. And that's where it finds the support. And then it does it again. And this time it probably goes a bit higher. This is like the middle S-curve type deal. And it's in the same level that we had before. See how it's trading these zones? It seems more likely. And then this is the time where maybe it comes back up higher and it goes towards this top zone here, the test. It doesn't have to get all the way up there, but that's kind of where the trajectory is. That would be more akin to like an auto reaction with a phase B top, assuming this is going to become bullish. Yeah. In reality, it kind of already made an auto reaction because this is the primary sell-off, which is the heavy sell-off. So this would be thought of as like an auto reaction with a sign of weakness, and then just keep walking down. This is the sign of weakness. So it's just got no strength right now. So it needs to kind of regain footing by making higher highs and higher lows. So assuming it's going to turn around, this is kind of the first step. Push up, break above 63 cents, back up, find support at 50 cents, push up, break above 77 cents. Then, and only then, I think, can you expect it to potentially start forming out. And this is where you get to like the bigger picture. And this is assuming that, again, this is going to do an accumulation. We don't know for sure. This is where I would be like, okay, now we're going to have to deal with this creek, and we're probably going to see if it makes a spring or doesn't. I'm not saying it's going to drop through the floor or something, but this is where you could watch for a potential spring here. So it'll do like a phase B bottom. It'll come maybe below this bottom or between the two, or it could go below it. If it's weak, and it looks kind of weak to me, then you might get what we call like a shrinking iteration. It may do it again. And you have just the kind of the same thing all over again, right? And then you just keep doing the same thing until you get to the bottom. If it's walking down towards that point, that's the way I would see it. If it's going to break out, then you probably have like a quick spring here, and this would not get stuck underneath, so it would be bullish. And it would probably be more rapid fire anyways if it were like that. But you'd come back up above and then re-advance. So if you're going to trade it, I think there's a decent chance that it's going to react up to here within the next couple of weeks. If you're willing to hold it for a long time. If you don't want to hold it, then I'd be wary when it jumps up. And there's a gap right here too. That's another telltale sign that I might be right, because that is where it needs to be in terms of where it's anchored. So it'd probably be a better trade to trade from like 48 cent up to 67 cent and then let it slump, because it's probably going to slump pretty hard. Why do I think that? Because it slumped here after like this massive sell down. This is a really weak bullish reaction from this huge sell-off. I mean, there's no perfection to this. Like right now, if it drops the uptrend, it could come down and make a lower low. This isn't saying it's broken. You know, you have to look at every time frame and give it just the importance that you need to give it. You know, we talk about these M shapes quite a bit on here. That walkout, that's just a way of walking it back up to the creek. Once it gets there, then you're going to have a more definite answer when it jumps the creek. Because if it hasn't jumped it yet, it hasn't jumped it yet. So is it possible that, especially right now, it just made the first wave? You know, there could be a creek retest down here. I mean, it's definitely not impossible that it comes back down and try to get to a low or a double bottom. That's just liquidity test though. Like, hey, are we going to hold this level? And if it's weak, that could signal like a later on distribution. If it's kind of strong and it holds higher, it kind of bodes better for what happens later. If this immediately came down and pushed to a new low, I'd consider that for a future prediction, like over here. So it would not surprise me if it dropped one more time just to kind of get to that back test here, and then suddenly just kind of rockets up and breaks above. It's a penny stock. It's very risky. Potentially there's a trade from 47 up to 65. So if you were to buy in now, it's still like a 40% trade. If you waited and it happened to get that low at like 45, it's more like a 50% trade. But that's probably about as far as I would put it. So I don't think this is a bad trade. I just think it's a simple trade that doesn't quite have the breakout yet. So I'd probably put an alert here. There's a lot that has to happen because it needs to get above this guy too, which was a downtrend curve. Otherwise, it could be at risk of like fall out further. All right, so I'm going to get, I don't know, is this one? I'm going to get rid of the, come on, Booksy, make up your mind. All right, no, I think the first one I picked out was the best. I'm going to leave it. I think the safest trade would be once it breaks above 54, it should run all the way back up to 65. We're in a simulation. It's about to creek jump. Well, maybe. Like if it hops here, it's cool to hear him talking in those terms, though. He was really nice to me the one time I met him, and he was very like flattering about the TA stuff. I don't really need to have that, but he was like, oh, yeah, I got a lot to learn. I still got a lot to go on. You got a lot going on here. I was like, yeah, well, everybody's on their own path, right? And not everybody's going to do this kind of crazy stuff anyways. People trade all kinds of ways in the market. So, but it's cool to see him talking about maybe jumping this creek. He's not wrong. It could be on the verge right here of really hopping. Now, short term, I don't know. He might be looking at a shorter term thing. I'm not quite there yet long term. I think it's got to jump above here. So I wonder if PGHL is the same bottoming out coming up. I feel like I set an alert on PGHL and I may have missed that trade. Yeah, I don't know. This isn't the stock. Obviously, this isn't the chart that I had it on. Or if it is, it's gone like way off the rails here. This is January 6th. This is a 15-minute chart. Let's look at the 4-hour. Yeah, see, this is the same kind of reaction that we're talking about, more or less like right now. Like this guy right here is the reaction we're looking for on the other chart. But see how this didn't go up? So this is how you guys should be able to tell, and it's pretty easy. If it reacts, after it reacts, it makes a lower low and it continues to sell down. The first thing that happens is that it continues to sell down. That auto reaction may be incomplete. Like it may need to still have a second auto reaction almost where it comes back up again. So you're waiting for that. And that's what happened right here is this like crossed up and over this guy coming down. So there's like a secondary auto reaction that comes up to the top. But then this is really where you can tell. So it's very similar to what we just charted because we're talking about maybe this first reaction. But then you just don't know because like if it's weak, then it just keeps going down. So this was so weak that even after it made that push up, it never makes another top. It just kind of crapped out and it didn't push up higher. This is how you would be aware that there's something amiss, because it doesn't make a higher high, essentially. And once this broke down here, so right there, you should have been like, everybody should have been looking at that like, that's the previous floor, right? Yeah, so obviously I had an alert at 136 and it didn't trigger. So maybe it was after that and it came down or something. This is where you would have been made aware that like, yeah, there's a problem. It's coming back through. And then you're at the mercy of like, what's the next creek on the docket? It's really very, very steep. I mean, so it's anybody's guess, because it may never get there. It may never get to this creek, PGHL. This is so darn steep, but it's like, that's the best you got, you know? So you're probably better off using like trends. I would use the upper trend on PGHL, not the creek. Creek's not really helpful right here. I'd use this one and then find the bottom. And I would suggest to you that that's the trend down. You just wait for a trend break. So yeah, I had a full chart workup for it, probably. You can see like it's just a bigger S-curve, shallow S-curve type setup. So it walked down, went sideways here for a while and from December on, and then this is like the breakdown right here. So the hardest thing about these is that I can't measure it very easily. I wish there was a better way to do it. Maybe I'll find one day, but I don't have a good measurement right here for this, because like the theory of it doesn't make any sense. The theory would be this drop should be a big reaction, but that's just not likely going to happen. I mean, it'd be hard for me to be like, yeah, that's going to happen. Well, you know, it'd probably be better to look for something a little more concrete. Like this has been dropped through there, so maybe that's more concrete. So maybe if there's a reaction, it goes up through, has to go through this guy first. This would be the weakness right here. See when it dipped low after making that breakout, it came back lower. We're signposts, and this is where it comes down and it hooks, sitting beneath it now. So it may be that this is like a new measurement right here, since it came up pretty far. And that's what we're really looking at. So for example, if that were the case, it's kind of a weak trend, but it's there. Yeah. I don't know, man. You just got to look at smaller and smaller and smaller time frames and see if there's an early divergence, and then see if it's working its way outward. This is just in like a walk down right now. It's literally a markdown phase. This is the closest it's come because of that big wick. This is the closest it's come to forming out a bottom. But this has happened before where it's had like a reactionary move, like it happened right here, and it's still distributed. So it's not a guarantee just because it had a nice strong reactionary bottom. It is coming off of being heavily oversold, and it looks moderately like a divergence. It's not the strongest. Yeah. It's going to be a step-by-step type trade, PGHL. You would be watching this first. If it does come back up, you'd have to break up here, and then you'd watch the next one up at 88 cents. Otherwise, I'd be worried about it kind of developing like a triangle and just kind of coming low and just doing the same thing, like slumping to try to get down towards this bottom. I don't know. It's hard to say. 60 cents maybe. Yeah. Clove, yeah, I've heard that just keeps going. It's strong. And NU was like that too. We had picked out NU a while ago, and guys, I was just completely wrong about it, I guess. I mean, I was right about the high point it could hit, but it just did not take breaks. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like that. That going on such like a meager beginning, really weak down bottom, to just having like incredible strength near the top to just hold up. This would have been the highest target that I had, and it did hit there, but I didn't expect it to go all the way up to 1350s. I just didn't think it was going to go fill that gap. There's another gap up here at like 15. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are like, it's going to go there. Maybe, there's if this bullish kind of continuation can hold, there is a possibility, this could be going up towards that gap by February 21st. Back to the top. What a massive recovery, if that's the case. And then it just left behind all this other stuff. And you're like, well, you had this idea that it was going to stay range bound. It didn't stay range bound. Well, no, it didn't. But the wave here kind of transcends that. Like there's a bigger wave, and then it doesn't necessarily mean it never comes back down. There's a complication to that in that there's now a potential for a second move lower going into April, May. It still could come back down. So it's like, I don't really know at this point. I'd have to honestly, I probably want to rechart this. This is really messy, but really, really messy. So I need to rechart it. But yeah, NU's been one that's just been really resilient. So it would not surprise me if it took a little breather here, but then went up. I mean, it probably should take a breather and come back to 1250, and then went up all the way to near 15 around earnings and just filled the gap. Strange as it may be to have that walk all the way back up, it does have the propensity for it, the setup for it. So it may very well happen. I haven't talked about some of the others. So Wolf was one that I was in MPW. I've re-entered. I don't think it's the strongest, but it's one of those trades that makes me feel like it could just pop any day now and just have a really massive ramp all of a sudden. In the past, when it's kind of consolidated at these levels, it's had really massive pushes. This has happened multiple times. Like right here, back in April 2024, it just popped and went all the way up to like the 630 area. And the same thing happened when it was in this region coming up into September of 2024. It just popped. I mean, it just kind of melts up back to the 650s. There's a gap right there at 624. So even though I've been pretty pessimistic about short term how high this goes on MPW, I thought maybe it comes back up to the 480 to 5, and I was right about that. This is a little red zone. The truth is that anytime it's broken above there with some serious strength, except for this as exception, this has been like the big one to beat. So it's very possible, if this doesn't like immediately come back down, that this goes all the way up to that gap area at 624. This is going to be like a big move if that happens. So I know I'm been a little bit more, like I said, pessimistic, conservative, and saying that I think maybe it moves, but then it kind of walks its way back through and drops down. But this is the big breakout. I mean, if it does jump this creek and hold it, that's the major breakout. I don't want to overstress this because I think that's dangerous. It happened up here and it didn't work out. This could be like a secondary kind of cat-ear motion. It certainly looks like it could be. It's in the right space for it. It's like perfect spot for that breakdown to happen right around earnings. But again, if it did jump and it did hold, this is a major breakout. Huge. Like this is a multi-year since 2022 walk down, and it's 2025, 3 years later, and it still hasn't left this widening. So while there's a chance that this is like a cat ear and it just kind of pops and then drops back down, and I think if it does that, it's probably going to go to a new low or down to the lows at least, lower portion of the threes. I think that if it jumps, it's probably just going to go. If it hits the sixes again, it could just be an SOS, and then it could just take off and go to like $10. I mean, it could be that simple. I don't want to oversell it. Obviously, looking at this, you're like, yeah, but when these broke out, they were chilling out around 50 RSI, and this is really, they were around 56. This is already up here at like 60, 70. Yeah, I know it's already overcooked on the daily quite a bit. I think on the weekly, what this does to me is it just kind of appears to be like this was the jump and it's come back and retest, right? And it definitely looks like there's possibility it could go either way, because you could continue to flag down this direction for an indefinite amount of time. And it, especially at this point, it's like, sure, we could come back down and make a new low at this point, and that RSI probably stays divergent. It probably just chills out here. Maybe it comes a little bit lower, but then it's just divergence all the way up from this this area that it broke down from. And this is what we saw in the man, this is almost exactly what happened for AMC, and that divergence goes all the way back to usually where about the target's going to be, and this is like $13. I think that it's more realistically this middle around 1150, but technically like that's where that begins, because it hits that low. So it hit the lowest sell point way back here at like $14. So it would not surprise me if this has some kind of massive squeeze from either where it's at now or down here at like 296 to all the way up to the top, later on. I wouldn't put it up in that pocket necessarily till that, we talked about February 2026 type stuff. That's probably around the same area that you would see it come back up. But just in theory, could it have early advancements that do other things? Like, could this pop early and then go sideways and do it again? Yeah, there's no reason it can't do that. It's just the mechanics of it. So I think MPW is the same situation. It's a really good play for long-term. I think it's a really strong play long-term for a bottom with shares only. I think that on the big picture, it's hard for me to, well, really everything from a daily down doesn't look super hot to me. It kind of looks like it would probably pop and then drop, but weekly up, it's like there's plenty of room for this thing to just take off if it does take off. It's just a matter of what happens really now going into February. So I think February is going to be a huge, 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 huge turning point for a lot of these stocks. They're not all going to be winners, but this is one that I'm watching really carefully. I think it's possible that could just be it, like an LPS, a spring here that goes back. If it goes back to the top, I can't imagine it coming all the way back down. So it would be really strange, like super strange. Not impossible, just very, very odd. Because at that point, I'm like, this just looks like a spring. If it just takes off, it just takes off. I'm not trying to get you guys to buy in or anything. Just be aware that it could very well be at or near a top right now, maybe up to 530. And if it is, it's going to slump and come back down. But if it does manage to break for whatever reason and go all the way up to the 650s, I think it's possible it could just take off. There's a weird alternative here that I haven't really talked about, which is like a more classic, like higher high and then lower low, or higher low, where it comes back to the creek and like 480s, I guess. That's possible. That's kind of what I have here, but it's like, I guess technically that could happen right here. You could SOS and then have a backup. And that would be similar. That'd be more in favor of like a May move, just like AMC and all them. That'd be really different. That'd be super cool, but because it would be different. I don't know. I like seeing stuff that's not exactly the same. It helps me learn. The two trades that I took that I didn't talk about, and I forgot about Wolf. I wanted to talk about Wolf. Wolf is a mixed bag for me. I feel like it just continues to make lower lows. These are high volume buy-ups, which is kind of strange. Like they're really high volume candles off this bottom, but they're weakening a little bit. I'm just kind of confused, to be honest. It went too high here. It came up like a penny or two too far, and then it slid down to a new low. If I have to guess at what's going on, what I think is happening is I think we're forming a diamond. And I think that the diamond, because when we started this, I was like, oh, it's just getting super volatile. And I wouldn't have picked a diamond at first. I was like, oh, it's just an M cross. But the way this is going, I'm like, it just kind of looks like it's starting to form a diamond, which is a sign of expanding volatility followed by contracting volatility. So you go from lighter volume to like all of a sudden your extremes. It's almost distributed. It's almost crazy because of it almost looks distributed because of how volatile it gets. So what these typically do is that the major length there, assuming that it actually it is what I think it is. If it's not, then it won't matter. But I'm going to do it anyways because I think maybe a lot of you guys are in Wolf. I'm in Wolf. I think it's really bullish. I think it may go up to near 1370, but I was concerned about it going for that gap, and it's just been like buying off that gap bottom is what's happening. Is it keeps getting lower and lower, but it's not quite getting through it. So this diamond structure, if it's happening, it's listing pretty bad, which means it's going like sideways and down. I would not be surprised if it is a diamond and it breaks in diamond fashion one way or the other. But the thing about the diamond is that it only has the strong breakout target to match. Why is it doing that? This distance. So if that's the case and it's like generating a diamond-like structure, when you get to the end of it, you can see it's kind of going this direction here. When you get to the end of that structure, I'll just do it like this. A little bit more consistency right there. And hard to say exactly when that's going to be, but when you get to the end of that structure, if it breaks to the upside, probably off of this 573 or something like that, maybe up here even at 613, that's not a huge boost. So it's a very strange thing. It left behind the S-curve that it had. I think that's just gone. It's almost pointless to have it on the chart now. I could keep the pivots are there. So, I mean, it's important because that's still where they are right here on February 3rd. But it's beyond that. It's kind of pointless to have it. And then the S-curve down as well is just really not there. It would have been this way. So it really didn't go either direction, weirdly enough. Kind of just stayed in the middle. That's why I'm wondering, like that termination point would be today on both those S-curves, up and down. So instead, it just kind of sat sideways, whipped around here. I think if it broke out to the upside, it'd probably just go. Even though this is not like the strongest, that is where the confirmation is. So if this was to the upside, it is outside the creek at that point. And that's the more major downtrend here, the first one. And so I think at that point it's probably just gone. But I'm curious because it also reminds me of like an extended cat ear where you have an M in the middle. Sometimes that happens and it looks like this. and you'll see like an iterative motion in the middle where it started looking like it's finished. Like, oh, the cat ears are right there in the middle. They look like they're done. But then it's actually like the middle of 2 ears. I don't like the idea of this one because it definitely makes me feel like this would then be probably pretty distributive in nature and come down. But the first moves here didn't really go that high. So I know maybe I'm confusing you a little bit with like the different ideas and analogies and junk. But here's where I would go with this. Wolf by itself may have like one more double flush left in it. And so this widening here, this diamond here builds out, breaks to the upside, and then it does so in a distributive way. So it comes just enough over the top at like 697 to get the liquidity to drop back through. We've seen this on a couple stocks, one being GME, where you get the double flush. You go down, up, or up and down. And it's bizarre because the diamond still acts like you would expect it, but instead you're using that momentum to kind of go the opposite way first, right? Now, I'm not saying that I want that to happen, so don't hear me wrong. I'm obviously bullish on this play, but I think that in the grand scheme of things, it actually would make a lot of sense, because if they wanted to get the gap fill, but they don't want to, and if you look at the big picture here, they don't necessarily want to make a new low, but they want to get back down there to trade liquidity. It does look like the right place to do like kind of a head fake and then drive back down to see if you can get a new low. And in the grand scheme of things, we would just see that as like the first M of a potentially larger cross. The bullish double beat on earnings didn't send it flying. It sent it kind of chopping. So there's a lot going on here. And I think what it's going to come down to is, I don't want to say chance or luck, but I think what it's going to come down to is a simple matter of like whether it holds up here once it gets to like 675 versus like a distribution. I think if it holds, you're not going to see it break back through, and this would be the second confirmation right here. You're not going to see it break back through this other creek there. Like it would test that and then like hold it and go back up. And that's that. And I think that if it does slide back through there, I think there's a decent chance it's going to go all the way. I mean, it could technically doesn't have to, but I think there's a decent chance it could go all the way back down to the gap after that. Because there's a huge amount of weaknesses that are showing up here. Like somebody wants to go down, but they're not getting it. They're not getting the liquidity they need to drive the price, so they keep pushing it back up. They're getting the buy-ins. It's such a mixed bag of signals here. But yeah, that's the way I would see it. So push away and then come back down through. Again, does that mean that it's bearish long term? No. But for the short term, I think this would be an adequate way to look at this. This is probably going to come back up to like 690. And then I think after that, it's a huge mistake to assume that it's going to go. That is where the confirmation is supposed to be, which is fine. But I really think you got to wait till 740 and really see that jump up. Otherwise, I think it's going to capitulate and do what would look like a diamond double flush and come right back through and go back to the lows. The issue with that one isn't, again, that it's necessarily bearish. It could be, I guess, that it goes down a little bit lower, maybe down to like 414 or something. I think the bigger concern is that it's not then out of the channel. It kind of creates a new problem, which is like a head fake. Oftentimes may delineate something else. There's just a lot. We'd have to watch it from there. Yeah. I could see it going down to test this like 39 or 415 area
potentially, and then kind of come back out in more strength later. That could happen here as well. It's just a matter of whatever happens. I couldn't tell you until we see the levels. I still think Wolf is really bullish. I've got positions in it, but I also know that these things are flexible in certain ways. And what may seem like a surefire thing may not be a surefire thing. Right now, I would have suggested that the end of February looked like a surefire strong bet. It's going to be up there, but it may very well be that it doesn't move until February 24th and you get some kind of massive push. And sure, it's there, but in the meantime, yeah, it goes there into March, great. But in the meantime, you could be struggling really bad, with this move. So just something to consider. Entry, exits, how you would determine whether it's going or not going, what to look for. Yeah, the 2 trades I took yesterday off stream and I posted them. I talked about AMD already. I'm just a bull for it. I don't know if it's going to be, frankly, kind of doesn't look good going into earnings. I got to be straightforward because to me, this is okay, I guess, on the hourly. But to me, that move was all sort of fabricated anyways. Like it just looked like a sort of a traditional backup to retest the floor. It was like a double dip beneath that 114.50. And the almost exact same structure on the bottom too. It was really easy to trade it because it was the same exact setup. Like basically it was identical to the first bottom. And so we're kind of seeing the same thing happening now, but we're going up above that trend. So I would guess that this is going to chop up into close and get back up to the ceiling again. And I'm a little nervous because I don't know what to expect with earnings. But no matter what happens, I think it's likely you're going to get some kind of a big move either way. I would not be surprised if we saw something kind of similar to what happened over here, where there's like a big pop and then it gets absorbed in the morning and then it tries to chop up to this edge again and then waits till, Wednesday, maybe even next week before really making a big move. I'd be pleasantly surprised if it just raced up. The reason for that, though, is because even though this did a pretty decent job backtesting that creek jump, it did leave a gap open. And so it would not surprise me to see this kind of come back down, even into this like Friday, and really find support this time. This is the second time we've gapped up off this level, off of 114.50. Like happened over here, happened right here. So it would not surprise me if it pushed up a little higher this time and tried to trade above 120s and then got sold down going into potentially going into Friday and got sold all the way back down to like 114. But then if that happens, I think Monday would be like takeoff kind of day. I think a pretty strong chance that gives you a position on Monday of serious strength. That'd be a creek test, gap fill. Instead of going low, it just holds high. I mean, it's a pretty big pullback. Part of me wonders if I should just do like a Elliott wave and be like 1, 2, 3 and not worry about it, but because the 618 is way up here. It's at 127. So it would suggest that like if this was an Elliott and this is a 1-2, that 3 could go all the way up to 127, essentially in like one move. Yeah, I mean, there's just no telling. This looks healthier to me, like in the long run. to have this kind of advance a little more methodically would be potentially a lot stronger for a foundation. If it just rockets here, I'd imagine it could have a pretty serious retracement. Like real low. Like it come all the way back down to 114 again. Yeah, longer term, this is stronger. Shorter term, I guess I'd rather it just go all the way up and just do the impulse wave. Just get it started, you know. Yeah, it goes all the way up to 120. What is that? 126.28. If that does have an impulse. I think the 2-hour EMA is right there. See, I'm wondering, we're going to check the 1 hour and then the 2 hours. They're in the right spot. They're kind of right where they should be with these fibs, so that's nice. So maybe. I don't know. I got like March 21st, so I've got a lot of time. OPTT. No, I haven't seen that. I'm not going to have time. I'm sorry. I got to get going. Anyways, this is one of the trades I took this week. I don't know, man. It may just take off and leave it behind the gap. I mean, if it doesn't, then I'd probably expect to come back down by Friday to 114. Could even be like a gap down tomorrow. Who knows? If it doesn't kind of beat earnings expectations, there's a lot of negativity about AMD right now, which makes me kind of bullish because I think that it's easier when it's looked down on. It's easier to kind of outperform expectations. When you look too highly at something, it's like, I don't know, maybe we're overestimating this, you know. So I'd rather it be underestimated and do really well, which is kind of where it's at right now. It's kind of it's definitely being estimated low. People just don't really think highly of it. That'll be after hours today. It's already up 3 and it's almost 4% on the day. You know, I may trade out of some of my position, but I don't want to chicken out completely. I think the 2 hour and up's got a lot of space. I could just definitely see this coming up, pushing a little higher and then dropping. Yeah, I think we're going to see a pump and then come back down. But who knows? Who knows? Maybe it's just sideways or something right here. Anyways, I'm going to watch this one. I'll let you guys know if I exit before the end of the day. If I do, it's probably just going to be to take some profit. I'll post it in the Discord group just to take some off the table. I had a lot invested in this over time, and I'm up quite a bit today, so I may already, I'm already up like over 20%. And the FANG calls are up a lot. That's good. They're actually selling a lot now. They're up 15%. So looking pretty good. I haven't even looked at FANG yet. I can do this on my own time though. You don't have to drag you guys through it. The FANG was one that I really felt pretty strongly about. That once it got to this low, I wanted to see it break. It hasn't broken out yet. I think there's a couple ways this could go. One is just a retracement, and this is starting to look like what I drew out. This was just a guess. If it doesn't break. If it does, it could just go right back up, but I feel like it's going to take a turn. I don't know. I guess we'll find out soon, won't we? Maybe take a turn down, go the other way. I don't know. Maybe I'll exit some of my position. Oh, it looks like I did already. Maybe they sold. Oh yeah, I did. Wow, they sold for 245. Seriously? Jeez. Who bought that? What? That's really high. Why did they buy them for that much? Now the bid is at 215. I mean, I'll take what I take, but that was kind of silly. Yeah, that's crazy, dude. I guess because no one's selling them for the bid, so nobody wants them for that much. Whatever. Such a strange thing. All right, guys, I got to go. Appreciate you hanging out, and we'll talk to you later.